Chapter 365. I sent my men to the place you mentioned. Guess what? The courtyard is full of steel weapons. Whoever goes there will sentence Hellion Vivian to death. Li Ming laughed. Even if the royal family finds out about this, they can only suffer in silence. The quantity is too large. Even the Ministry of War does not have the authority to make so many weapons, let alone a concubine like her. This time, Hellion Vivian will definitely suffer a great loss. Li Ming's explanation was clear and logical. He expressed that he didn't do anything out of line and only followed the procedures to arrest her. For this kind of privately harboring weapons, no matter who it was, they had to be arrested. It just so happened that he could use this incident to dampen Wei Wei's spirit and let her know that she didn't have the final say in the capital. Su Yinamo smiled satisfactorily after hearing that. After all, that bastard was only in her teens. Even if she was really possessed by someone else, she would not know what taboo was in the imperial court. Until now, she probably still did not understand why she was arrested. Come, let's continue drinking tea. Su Yinamo greeted Li Ming warmly, ready to watch Hellion Vivian's show. When the time came, she and Guangyao would go to the emperor and mention a few words. Then, that bastard's good days would come to an end. Even the third prince could only watch from the sidelines. A restless little girl actually wanted to usurp the throne. This was a crime of the highest order. No one could even think of pleading for her. It was rare for Su Yinamo to be so happy. Li Ming also flattered her. Both of them were chatting when they saw the Hellion Jiaoer walk in from outside. Li Ming quickly got up, his eyes roaming over the Hellion Jiaoer. He could not bear to look away. This was the first time he saw his fairy-like cousin at such a close distance. He appeared to be very attentive, but the Hellion Jiaoer looked down on these relatives from other places. She thought that these people were only able to get to where they were today because of her. Hellion Jiaoer was already disgusted with him, plus that pair of unruly eyes of his, so she didn't even bother to pay attention to him. Just as she was about to directly go to the inner room, she suddenly heard him mention a child who was following beside Wei Wei. Hellion Jiaoer paused. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "Is the child you're talking about bald?" When Li Ming saw that his fairy-like cousin was talking to him, his face immediately lit up. Yes, that's him. He's just a baldy who doesn't know the rules at all. It's true that the barren hills and turbulent rivers give birth to crafty people. Even a country bumpkin is so crafty, protecting that Hellion Vivian at every turn. I've locked him up in prison together with her. Hearing this, Hellion Jiaoer's expression suddenly changed. Say that again. What did you do to him? Yes, I did. That little baldy started the trouble, so I caught him too. Li Ji didn't think it was a big deal. Su Yinamo didn't care either. So be it. He's just a poor kid who follows a blacksmith around. When the time comes, we'll just give him some benefits and let him go. Mother, that's not a poor kid. Hellion Jiaoer's fingers trembled. I don't know if I'm right, but I keep thinking that it's the seventh prince. Su Yinmo's heart skipped a beat. She said with some hope, That's impossible. Why would the seventh prince appear in such a place? Mother, you don't know. That Hellion Vivian somehow got the seventh prince to follow her around since they were in school. This time, he must have followed Hellion Vivian to that courtyard house. Hellion Jiaoer's expression became uglier the more she thought about it. Li Ming broke out in cold sweat. Seventh prince? He caught the seventh prince? It was as if something in his brain had snapped. Li Ming fell heavily on the wooden chair, the teacup in his hand falling to the ground. He was dumbfounded. Catching Hellion Vivian was different from catching the seventh prince. Who was the seventh prince? He was the third prince's younger brother, the retired emperor's favorite grandson. A year ago, he was the one who made all the ministers in the capital cry for their parents. How did he bump into the little demon king who had not been seen for more than a year? If he caught the seventh prince, not to mention Madame Su, even Prime Minister Su would be in trouble. No, he had to leave. Yes, he had to leave the capital as soon as possible. Su Yinamo glanced at Li Ming. She was a little flustered. How could he be so stupid as to catch the seventh prince? If they were caught by following the vine to the melon, who knew what kind of disaster they would spit out? Su Yinamo clenched her fists. Her mind was spinning fast. In the blink of an eye, She came up with an idea. Hellion Vivian made such a large amount of weapons privately. It is a serious crime. Even if the seventh prince is here, she is still guilty. Li Ming nodded repeatedly. His face was still pale and flustered. He stammered, Madame Su. Then what do you think I should do? Leave the city first. No matter what, she could not stay in the general's residence any longer. Su Yinamo stood up and warned, don't tell anyone that you've been here. You've misled people because you were enforcing the law. Don't be afraid if you're caught. Just say that you're thinking that someone has a rebellious heart, and that's why you led the soldiers to put them in jail. Remember, as long as you don't say anything, they won't do anything to you. You're a smart person. I don't need to spell it out clearly. I know, Madame Su. Don't worry, I won't say anything that shouldn't be said. Li Ming left immediately after he finished speaking. However, at this moment, Nan Gonglai had already received news. As a member of the priestly clan, he was better at taking the side door than others. He said, I found out. That person is called Li Ji. He was transferred over from outside. Right now, people have already gone to his house to ambush him. When he appears, he will immediately be captured. Baligaju's mouth twitched. His surname is Li? Not Su? Nan Gonglai was stunned for a moment. If he could find out about Li Ming, he could naturally find out that he had some kinship with the Su family. Originally, he thought that the recent situation in the imperial court was not good, so he wanted to leave the Su family a way out first and wait until later to punish them. Now that he heard Aju's meaning, it seemed that he was going to investigate with great fanfare. Baligaju's eyes were fierce. He said coldly, since you want to investigate, then investigate to the end. Find out all the people who are related to him. Nan Gonglai rubbed the bridge of his nose, thinking that this was a real tiger. Even though Little Seven was domineering when fighting, but whoever Bailey Jiaju set his eyes on, he wouldn't even leave the slightest path of retreat for the other party. He would definitely make the other party's corpse disappear before he would stop. Therefore, the entire capital started a big investigation. It was like poking a hornet's nest. All the shops started to be investigated. Fortunately, the investigation this time was targeted. They caught each one accurately, but it was also confusing. However, in the end, some people figured out the knack. Because behind these shops, most of them were directly or indirectly related to the Su family. Chapter 366. Someone wanted to stop them, but the search was too quick. After the other party had searched the shops, they began to arrest officials from the Ministry of War and Ministry of Civil Affairs. The search this time had uprooted all the connections that Su Yinamo had built with the help of the Su family's prestige. Not only her trusted aides, but even those who were close to her were wiped out. Not only did this completely cut off Su Yinmo's wings in the capital, it was also a vicious warning to her. It was a clear message to everyone that whoever helped this woman would be in for a bad time. And all of this was done in secret. Not many people could react in time. Not to mention Li Ming, who was preparing to flee the capital. He had only gone back to pack his money when he was surrounded by the shadow guards who had barged in. Only then did he realize who was the one who had caused such a commotion in the capital. It was the third prince who he had never expected to be involved in this matter. When Li Ming entered the yamen, his body was dirty and disheveled. He glared with bloodshot eyes. He did not care if he had arrested the little seventh prince. After listening to Madame Su's words, he insisted that Hellion Vivian wanted to usurp the throne and push the main responsibility to Hellion Vivian. At this moment, His Highness was standing in the dark of the interrogation room, listening to Li Ming's words with cold eyes. Li Ming did not realize the danger he was in. The shackles on his hands rattled as he moved. I was only following orders. Hellion Vivian committed such a serious crime. How could I have arrested the wrong person? Tap. Bailey Jiaju strode out with his long legs and slowly walked out from the shadows. His gaze was very indifferent, and his thin lips seemed to carry a smile as he raised them up. What did you say? Li Ming suddenly paused. His scalp was numb, and he did not dare to move. He only shouted, Royal? Before he could say anything, Baligaju suddenly stretched out a long and colorless hand. In a strange posture that seemed to tear through the darkness, he attacked Li Ming's neck. Coldness was the first thing that entered Li Ji's mind. Then, it was pain, and finally, it was fear, because he was actually being choked by the neck and lifted into the air. The feeling of his feet leaving the ground made Li Ji lose his center of gravity. His lips began to tremble slightly as fear filled his eyes. Bailey Jiaju's movements were too fast. Li Meng simply didn't have time to react. In the darkness, the enchanting redness slowly dispersed from the man's pair of eyes. His handsome face was so white that there was almost no trace of blood, making people who saw it feel apprehensive. "You think you're right to catch her?" The cold aura carried a thick, killing intent. A cruel smile appeared on the face shrouded in black fog. Because his throat was being strangled, Li Meng found it difficult to even open his mouth. His legs were shaking, and he looked like he was going to die at any moment. The interrogating official hurriedly wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and said word by word, Your Highness." Beligaju acted as if he didn't hear anything. He stood in the middle of the room elegantly. His lips were red and his teeth were white. Together with his incomparably handsome face, he looked like a god who had walked out of a manga. But the corner of his mouth was filled with a sinister viciousness. It was a killing intent that hadn't been revealed for a long time. Perhaps this was the famous overlord who once ruled the capital. At this time, Beligaju only had one thought in his mind. Kill this stupid human. His bloodthirsty eyes were covered with anger. His voice was cold as the judgment of hell. "This Highness' precious prey, is he someone you can touch?" His 10 ivory fingers were as strong as white jade. With a cruel and irresistible force, he tightly gripped Li Ji's neck. He couldn't move at all. Li Ji's face was twisted and he was out of breath. He was so pale that he didn't look human. Hellion Vivian frowned as she watched from the side. "This won't do. If His Highness kills someone here, it'll be difficult to explain. Moreover, this person had to be kept alive to lure out the people behind him." Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian turned around and reached out from behind Beligaju. She pressed down on his wrist. "You can't kill him now." The warmth from her fingers made the layer of red light in Bailey Jiaju's eyes gradually fade away. Then, he let go of his hand and casually threw Li Ji to the ground. He looked back at Hellion Vivian and seemed to have recovered his usual indifference. First, he leisurely tidied up his outer robes. Then, in a cold voice, he ordered the person beside him, "Let him have a good taste of what it's like to be imprisoned for no reason." Yes. The interrogating official finally let out a sigh of relief. If the royal family really killed him like this, it would be difficult for him to write a confession. Fortunately, thinking of this, the official couldn't help but look at Hellion Vivian. He bowed and said in a small voice, "It's all thanks to Wang Fei. It's what I should do. Continue the investigation." Hellion Vivian smiled. She didn't say anything else and walked out. The official wiped the sweat on his forehead again. He was more or less confused. Didn't they say that the third prince married Wang Fei to deal with the retired emperor? Why did the third Wang Fei's words sound so authoritative? Thinking about it carefully, this was the first time His Highness listened to someone when he was angry. The official raised his eyebrows but didn't think much of it. He turned his head and continued to interrogate Li Ji. Li Meng had just regained his strength and was panting heavily. He was a smart person and had many tricks up his sleeve. In addition, he had been in the Ministry of Appointments for so long. He knew very well that if he insisted that Hellion Vivian wanted to usurp the throne, no matter how much the retired emperor doted on the third prince, he would have a knot in his heart. When that time came, even if the third prince wanted to punish him, he would have to reconsider. But he didn't know that the retired emperor had ordered Hellion Vivian to make this batch of weapons. There was no such thing as a rebellion. Moreover, the retired emperor didn't want anyone else to know about this batch of weapons. Now that Li Ji had exposed it in such a situation and Shao Qi had been wronged, the retired emperor was even more determined to investigate to the end. He wanted to see just who was trying to make trouble for him. So he didn't immediately punish Li Ji. Instead, he let Beligaju continue the investigation. In fact, even if the retired emperor didn't say anything, Beligaju didn't plan to just arrest him. From the beginning, his target was the Su family. Su Yanamo was indeed panicking. After hearing the news that Li Ji had been arrested, she started to fidget. She cursed Li Ji in her heart for being rash. She anxiously paced back and forth in the hall. No, she had to strike first. She knew that this was a serious matter. Now, the only way was to exaggerate Hellion Wei Wei's crime and spread it out. Chapter 367. She couldn't participate in the politics of the imperial court. Only Hellion Guangyao and her father could. Her father's recent deployment in Jiangnan was problematic, so he could not speak at this time. Hellion Guangyao was also busy with the Hellion family recently, so he could not be involved. It seemed that only the Empress could speak at this time. Su Yinmo's mind was active. She thought for a while and made up her mind. She shouted outside, "Come, change clothes and enter the palace." It was troublesome to enter the palace. However, Su Yinmo and Empress Morong had a good relationship. Before they were married, they were together, thinking about how to scheme against Hellion Vivian's mother. Recently, Empress Morong's heart was very sullen. Her own younger brother was arrested, but as the Empress, she could not say a word. She already hated Bailey Jiaju in her heart. She could not wait to completely eradicate this little bastard. Her brother asked her to wait, but how could she wait? Her son was ranked 5th. He was good in both civil and military matters, but he was not favored. The emperor liked him, but what was the use of liking him? Everyone in the world knew that as long as the retired emperor did not delegate power, the throne would not be decided by the emperor. The more she thought about it, the more annoyed she was. As soon as she looked up, she saw Madame Su kneeling on the ground. "Your Highness, this time, I must beg you to save me." "What's wrong?" Empress Morong pitied her, but she enjoyed this feeling. Before they were married, they were all sisters who played together, but she was much more superior than these people. However, when she thought about it carefully, that bitch Hellion had never knelt before her. Empress Morong clenched her hands and comforted Su Yinmo. "Sit down first. Tell me slowly. I have a distant cousin who works in the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. When he went out for a routine inspection today, he accidentally flipped over a courtyard. The courtyard was full of weapons. Carriages and carriages were moving them out mysteriously. My cousin was sure that there was something wrong with the other party. After checking, there was indeed something wrong. The courtyard was full of privately made weapons. The whole courtyard was full of them. It seemed like they were up to something," Su Yinmo said exaggeratedly. When Empress Morong heard this, she also frowned. "So many weapons. Could it be that this person wants to?" "That's what my cousin thinks too." Su Yinmo saw that the Empress was starting to get suspicious, so she lowered her voice and said, "Moreover, these weapons are all related to Hellion Vivian. She is the owner of the courtyard, and she even hid many weapons in the courtyard that were used to kill the enemy. The retired emperor's greatest taboo was to form cliques for personal gain and to have his subordinates conspire against him. However, this girl was really good. She had done so much behind his back. He didn't know what she was thinking. The emperor is seriously ill now, and the retired emperor is also old. I think some people can't wait any longer, so they made such a big circle." At this point, Su Yinmo paused, leaving the rest for Empress Morong to think about. She understood Empress Morong's thoughts. She wanted her own son to inherit the throne, but there was still the third prince standing in the way. Even without the third prince, the retired emperor still favored the 7th prince. Therefore, Empress Morong couldn't wait to sweep the 2 bastards left behind by the previous empress out of the palace. This time, if Hellion Vivian's actions were to be blown out of proportion, Baligaju would definitely be dragged down as well. It was impossible for Empress Morong not to do such a good thing. If she didn't do it, then the person who would lose the throne would be his 5th prince. As expected, Empress Morong's expression changed abruptly. "This is nonsense. What are weapons? Even the Ministry of War wants to control the production." "You're right. One Hellion Vivian doesn't have the ability to do so. Third prince must be involved in this. I'm going to find someone to seal up that courtyard now." "Don't worry, Empress." Seeing that the time was right, Su Yinmo said directly, "That cousin of mine has recklessly arrested them. They are now in the prison cell, waiting to be interrogated. Those weapons have also been transferred to the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. It's really a case of caught red-handed." "Well done." In her heart, Empress Morong had already determined that Bailey Jiaju made these weapons in order to seize the throne. Now that she heard the words caught red-handed, her mind was filled with thoughts of how to report Bailey Jiaju to the retired emperor later, so that that little bastard would never be arrogant again. Su Yinamo bit her lip and said, "But when he was arresting people, he accidentally took the little seventh prince away too." Empress Morong paused and said in shock, "What did you say?" At that time, the little seventh prince was also there. He didn't know who the little seventh prince was, so he thought that the little seventh prince was a child brought by a blacksmith. Furthermore, the little seventh prince kept obstructing my cousin's investigation, so he brought him back to the yamen. However, my cousin knew his limits and didn't hit anyone. However, because my cousin took away the weapons in the yard, he was directly sent to prison by the third prince. Su Yinamo observed the empress's expression as she said, "The retired emperor probably doesn't know about this yet. The third prince turned the entire Beijing upside down just to catch my cousin. Firstly, he wanted to avenge the seventh prince, and secondly, he wanted to settle everything before the retired emperor asked." The so-called settling was just silencing people. When Empress Morong heard this, she already had her own thoughts in her mind. Previously, Bailey Jiaju had captured her without any consideration for her feelings. For so many days, she had been hoping that something would happen to Baligaju. A prince's wife secretly mass-produced weapons. Even if it was a joint responsibility, that little bastard could forget about keeping the retired emperor's favor from spilling a single drop of blood. Empress Morong's eyes turned and said to Su Yinamo, "You go back first. I'll get someone to do justice for this." Su Yinamo knew that there was hope when she heard this. She was relieved, but she couldn't be too careless. She had people keep an eye on the news in the palace at all times. Although Empress Morong knew that Su Yinamo had her own ideas, there were too few opportunities to drag down Baligaju. Moreover, that little bastard, although young, had bullied her son in the palace many times. That little tiger by Baligaju's side deserved to be arrested. Of all the places he could go, he just had to stay in that courtyard house. Empress Morong thought fiercely. She felt more and more that she should take advantage of this incident to vent her anger. But she also knew that she couldn't say anything about this. The retired emperor had always disliked her. Moreover, women in the harem shouldn't be involved in these matters. So, she didn't go herself. Instead, she first whispered something to the emperor. Chapter 368. The emperor had been refining pills for a long time and indulged in women's charms. His entire person looked dispirited and listless. But the more he was like this, the more he would think about it when the empress said a few words beside him. Especially when it came to the matter of princes coveting his throne, he would more or less feel annoyed and disgusted. He didn't investigate further. After listening to Empress Morong's words, he directly went to the retired emperor's study. The retired emperor's anger hadn't subsided yet when he was angered by the emperor's words. "You said that Ju'er has the intention to rebel? He wants to fight for your throne?" Shaoqi didn't go anywhere, but he didn't listen and went outside the village. That's why he was caught? The emperor was mediocre and had a weak personality. If he didn't give birth to a good son, he wouldn't have been able to get the throne back then. He also knew why the retired emperor helped him to the throne, but they were both his sons. He was most afraid of his imperial father in his life. Even after he became the emperor, this didn't change. He would hide if he could. If today's matter wasn't so serious, he wouldn't have come to see the retired emperor. It was a matter of thinking for a while, but it was another matter when he actually met the retired emperor. After hearing the retired emperor's words, he couldn't even speak properly. "That's not what I meant. What I meant was that Li Ming was too reckless. However, this matter can't be entirely blamed on him. Third brother had such a weapon outside. Someone should investigate." Bang! Before the emperor could finish his words, the retired emperor slammed his hand on the table and stood up. He was exasperated with the retired emperor's failure to meet his expectations. "Get out of here. Get out of here right now." When Eunuch Sun heard the words "get lost," he knew that the retired emperor was really angry. When he raised his head, he saw the retired emperor again. He was holding his forehead and hurriedly supported his master. No matter how mediocre the emperor was, he wasn't insensible. Now that he saw the retired emperor so angry, he panicked and called out anxiously, "Imperial father! Imperial father!" The retired emperor waved his sleeves and pushed him away. He took a deep breath and regained his usual dignity. This son of his was the failure of his life. Even after becoming the emperor, he was still muddle-headed and listened to whatever was said. Now that things had come to this, he was actually speaking up for someone else. "Let me ask you, is little Seven your son?" The retired emperor's voice was filled with anger. "Your son was captured for no reason at all, and you're still speaking up for others. I don't think you're a soft-hearted person. You're just incompetent." The emperor didn't dare to reply to the retired emperor's words. His face turned pale. The retired emperor steadied his breathing and sneered, "You usually fiddle with those medicinal pills, and I don't care. Why did you think of asking about these things today? Tell me, did the empress you chose say something in your ear again? I just feel that the matter of this weapon is no small matter." The emperor licked his lips and explained, "I don't want to speak for anyone. I'm just worried that the third prince really has other thoughts." The retired emperor wanted to get angry again. If he had such thoughts, you would have been dragged down as the emperor a long time ago. For so many years, who was the one who blocked the outside? That's why the four great families didn't dare to act recklessly. If it was only you, our war dragon empire would have been lost long ago. You still have a place to refine pills? Your Majesty, you should give yourself some face. The emperor looked at the retired emperor's cold eyes and didn't dare to say anything more. However, the retired emperor didn't plan to let it go. He encouraged the emperor to say that Jew-er wasn't good. It was obvious that he wanted to frame Jew-er. He ordered someone to make this batch of weapons and asked that girl, Wei Wei, to make it. There were still some of his men guarding the courtyard. Under such circumstances, the news actually leaked out. Not to mention that his most beloved grandson had been captured. His third grandson had also suffered an unjust injustice. He originally thought that Jew-er's fanfare was a little too disrespectful to those old people's face. Now it seemed that these people couldn't wait for his two grandsons to die a horrible death. "Good, really good. Eunuch's son, call the empress over." The retired emperor threw away the booklet in his hand. His eyes were as cold as ice, making all the eunuchs and palace maids standing in the palace shiver. When the empress heard that the retired emperor wanted her to go in, she looked at the emperor's pale face. Her heart immediately skipped a beat. However, she didn't know that those weapons were made by the retired emperor. She insisted that since Hellion Wei Wei had the guts to make so many weapons, then there must be someone supporting her behind the scenes. That's right, that girl Wei Wei does have someone behind her. The retired emperor looked at the empress who was desperately trying to convict Hellion Vivian and laughed coldly. "That person is not anyone else, it's me." What? The empress suddenly felt her legs go weak. Her previous arrogance was all gone. She hurriedly looked at the emperor. The emperor was also stunned in place. Things had already gone beyond their imagination. They had never expected that the batch of weapons was actually ordered by the retired emperor to be made. "Go and show this idiot the secret memorial that I wrote earlier." The retired emperor ordered Eunuch's son who was beside him. He no longer cared about his usual etiquette and was only one step away from pushing the emperor out to give him a beating. The empress looked at the words on the envelope. Her face became uglier and uglier, and her fingers began to tremble. The retired emperor glanced at her. "I ordered the weapons to be made. Am I also plotting to usurp the throne?" As he spoke, the retired emperor threw the teacup in his hand away. It fell beside the empress. The empress was so frightened that she didn't even dare to raise her head. Interfering in the court without permission. Murong Yin heir, this is what your father taught you. When the empress heard the retired emperor calling her by her name, she knew that this matter was going to be bad. Then, the retired emperor laughed coldly. "Pass down the order. Say that the empress has lost her virtue and is wholeheartedly trying to frame the prince. From today onwards, remove her status as the empress and banish her to the cold palace." "Retired emperor, you can't do this. I'm the daughter of the Murong family, You can't do this. Morong Yin Air was so anxious that she said something that she shouldn't have said. The retired emperor said angrily, "Using the Morong family to pressure me? Good, very good. Morong Wang really raised a good daughter. Immediately take her away for this emperor." Yes. The shadow guards immediately pulled the empress up. The empress cried and shouted. She kept calling out, "Your Majesty." The emperor also wanted to plead for leniency for her, but he saw the retired emperor rubbing his forehead as if he was completely disappointed. He looked at him and said, "You also leave. Go back and think about what evil things the empress you chose has done." Chapter 369. At this moment, the emperor did not dare to say anything else and retreated immediately. The general's residence. The smile on Su Yanmo's face gradually disappeared as she could not receive any good news. Logically speaking, the empress should have a result soon. However, until now, she had not received any news at all. There was also no news from the people she sent out. Su Yanmo had a bad feeling in her heart, and her palms were full of cold sweat. At this moment, the steward who helped her out rushed in hastily with a flustered look on his face. "Master, our shops have been investigated, and all the officials who are related to us have been arrested." The steward was out of breath as he spoke. Su Yanmo felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck her. She hurriedly went out to ask around. Too many people had been arrested. Not only the few officials who were related to her, but even the forces that the Su family had planted were also investigated. Su Yanmo panicked. She was in a terrible fix as she searched everywhere for money to fill the hole. At the same time, she had to be careful not to be discovered. What made her even more anxious was that no matter how much money she offered, no one would help her. This was a situation that had never happened before. Su Yanmo thought that she could only rely on Helian Guangyao now. However, Helian Guangyao had not been back often during this period. However, he always had to give an excuse. Now, he only asked people to bring back a cold sentence. Sometimes, he did not even say a word. She did not know what he was doing. Su Yanmo was very anxious. However, she could only watch as those people were arrested. There was no way she could do anything. Su Yanmo comforted herself that everything was not set in stone yet. According to Li Ming's character, he would not expose her. Even if she was really involved, Helian Vivian's crime was much more serious than hers. She did not have to worry so much. Su Yanmo did not know that her so-called crime did not exist at all. It was night, in the prison. Li Ming had never suffered like this before. He thought that someone would get him out soon. However, half a day had passed, and there was no news from the outside. Not only that, what made Li Ming even more unbearable was that he was not even allowed to drink a mouthful of water under the glaring light, and no one spoke to him. Even when he was beaten up before, he was in a better state than this. An unprecedented sense of panic caused his forehead to be filled with cold sweat. "Young master, let's go in and beat him up again. It's too easy for that bastard to wait like this." De Xiong fiddled with his fingers in front of Helian Vivian indignantly. Helian Vivian smiled lightly. "Don't worry. Treating him this way will make him feel worse than beating him up." "Is that so?" De Xiong didn't understand. He was just sitting there. So why would he feel uncomfortable? Helian Vivian curled her thin lips and crossed her arms as she listened to the sounds inside. According to the analysis of the experts, if a person is left in an unfamiliar environment for a long time under intense light, with no one to talk to him, and with no way to obtain information from the outside, this person will feel uneasy. Of course, uneasiness is only the first step. In the long run, he will feel that something is wrong everywhere, and then he will have a mental breakdown. As soon as Helian Vivian finished speaking, De Xiong heard the screams coming from inside the cell. Li Ming couldn't take it anymore. He hugged his head. His face was extremely pale, and his lips were blue because of the lack of water. "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything." De Xiong's eyes widened as he looked at Helian Vivian. He thought to himself, how can this work? He didn't know that Helian Vivian was using the most professional interrogation technique of the American FBI. It was the famous psychological attack technique. Not only De Xiong, but even the prison guards were impressed by Helian Vivian's method. She didn't need to do anything to get him to talk. Helian Weiwei strolled in and sat opposite Li Ming leisurely. With a lazy and handsome air, she said, "Tell me, how did you know the address of the courtyard?" "It was Madame Su. Madame Su told me." Li Ming's eyes were bloodshot. "She said that you made a batch of weapons and that the location was just outside the city. If I can find out about this batch of weapons, I'll definitely be rewarded. After all, making weapons without permission is a serious crime." Helian Vivian looked at him indifferently but didn't say anything. Li Ming was on the verge of breaking down after being locked up for a few hours. He didn't know what Helian Vivian was thinking. He felt that this person was more difficult to deal with than all the ministers he had met before. Was this still the love-struck good-for-nothing? Li Ming narrowed his eyes as he watched. He was afraid that Helian Vivian would think that what he said was useless and continue to lock him up. He immediately sold out all the men that the Su family had planted in the capital over the years. This time, it wasn't just Su Yinamo. Even the old fox, Prime Minister Su, who had painstakingly built up his influence in the capital over the years, had suffered heavy losses. Anyone with some potential had been uprooted. "Young master, you're amazing." De Xiong watched the entire process with his mouth agape. Now, he truly admired this new leader who had taken over. Helian Vivian held Li Ming's confession and curled her lips into a sinister smile. "I've said it before. If anyone dares to bully people in my territory, I'll uproot them." Li Ming was blind this time. He had completely fallen for it. He didn't know that Helian Vivian didn't speak because she was waiting for him to speak. The more Li Ming spoke, the more flaws he would reveal. This was a psychological battle. The more silent Helian Vivian was, the more flustered Li Ming became. He thought that Helian Vivian knew everything, so naturally, he told her what he should and shouldn't say. Beligaju watched this scene casually. When she was done with the interrogation, he glanced at her indifferently. "Come with me." Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows and followed Beligaju to the corner. However, he turned around and trapped her in the corner. "Your interrogation method is very special. I learned it after joining the Battle Spirit Forces." Helian Vivian's answer was flawless. Beligaju looked at her with a faint smile. "Is that so?"
Yes.
Helian Vivian thought to herself, did he discover something? Risking being burned by His Highness as a monster every day was really a test of her acting skills. Beligaju smiled indifferently with appreciation. "It's a good method to destroy the prey from the inside out." Helian Vivian chuckled. A person who could appreciate this kind of interrogation method was really a pervert. "It's just that it's not thorough enough." Beligaju rubbed her small face with his fingers. Her skin was smooth and cold like a piece of warm jade. After touching it twice, he didn't care about her perfunctory answer. If you tell him that Su Yinamo didn't protect him at all, but used him as a scapegoat, he'll break down even more. Chapter 370. Helian Vivian was speechless. She had no choice but to concede defeat to such an insidious method of driving a wedge between them. "Your Highness, are you teaching me to be an evil woman? Didn't he say that he hated women with ulterior motives the most? Why was he teaching her this?" Beligaju did not answer her. Instead, he rubbed the mark he left on her neck with his finger. He was satisfied to see Helian Vivian tremble. This was a new hobby of His Highness recently. It was as if he was confirming his own territory. Helian Vivian looked at him speechlessly. Beligaju's eyes turned cold. "It's faded a lot. That was for sure." She used the strawberry juice in her space to remove the mark every day. If there was no effect, it would be a waste of her magical strawberry juice. It had a whitening effect. Helian Vivian smiled, looking very happy. Bailey Jiaju looked at her. His thin lips were cold. He didn't like how happy she was right now. It was as if this little thing was always thinking about how to get rid of him. "Your Highness." Aning stood a meter away, not daring to come any closer. He could only report from afar. Prime Minister Su saw that you've captured his people and couldn't help but make a scene. He's now standing in front of the retired emperor's palace with Su Yinma. Beligaju smirked and said with a strong sense of viciousness, "Bring Li Ming's testimony and let's go back to the palace." "Yes." Shadow bowed his head respectfully. He was more or less confused. Why did he feel that His Highness's tone was colder than before? No matter what, the Su family was really in deep trouble this time. The lanterns were lit outside the palace where the retired emperor lived. Prime Minister Su was kneeling with Su Yenimo. He put his crown on his left and put his knees on the ground, waiting for the retired emperor to give him an explanation. Why did the third prince capture all of his people? What crime did they commit? He had to give him an explanation. Su Yenimo knew the reason, but she did not dare to tell her father the truth. She only told him what she had said to the empress. Prime Minister Su had no idea how things were progressing, but he was more experienced than Su Yenimo. He knew that the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs would not be able to get anything out of the interrogation in such a short time, so he wanted to strike first. He had the same thoughts as the empress, even though they had caught the little seventh prince by mistake. But compared to all these, harboring and manufacturing weapons was the real crime. If he knelt here today, all the ministers would know that the third prince not only had the intention to rebel, but also abused his imperial power to casually arrest people. This was the scene that Hellion Vivian and Beligaju saw when they entered the palace. Prime Minister Su kept his composure. He knelt outside in the middle of summer and did not even get up. Even when he saw Beligaju and Hellion Vivian, there was no change in his expression. He was very thoughtful. However, Su Yenmo's eyes fell on Hellion Wei Wei. Back then, she had the chance to kill this little bastard, but she chose to keep this little bastard alive. Firstly, it was because the same blood flowed in her body as her mother's, so she might come in handy one day. Secondly, compared to killing her, she preferred to see this little bastard's downfall. Back then, she could not compare to that person in the Hellion family. Wherever that person was, she would never be able to make a name for herself. That person was the most pampered person in the capital since she was young. Everything she ate and used was the best. Even the emperor back then had to please her when he was young, but he was still willing to get what he wanted. Unlike them, they had to look at other people's faces. She had never made a name for herself because of that person. Fortunately, the heavens were fair and gave her a chance to get Hellion Guangyao. That young lady from an aristocratic family who was spoiled by men did not understand that sometimes what men needed was to lower their tone and cooperate with the other party. Her dominance would only make men unfaithful. How could she bear to give up such a feeling of victory? Seeing that person's daughter live a life worse than a dog or a pig, despised by everyone, made her 100 times happier than killing that little bastard. It was just that she did not expect that she would leave behind a disaster for herself. Su Yenimo looked regretfully at Hellion Vivian's back as she walked in front. Her hands that were hidden under her long sleeves slowly clenched. When she looked up, her face was full of certainty. The third prince's big move had already angered her father. Now that her father was kneeling outside like this, it was bound to cause a lot of discussion in the court. Now that it had come to this, even if the retired emperor wanted to turn a big problem into a small one, it would be impossible. He had to give the court officials an explanation, and this explanation was bound to abolish that little bastard's position as princess consort. Because the retired emperor wanted to protect his beloved grandson, the third prince, he had to push someone out to stop the public from talking. And this little bastard was the best tool. At that time, this little bastard would be abolished, and her Jiao heir would have another chance. Su Yenmo's calculations were very good, and the corners of her mouth rose. At this moment, the palace door opened. The retired emperor looked at the Su family's father and daughter, who were kneeling in front of the door expressionlessly. His voice was neither mild nor mild. "Dear official Su, you came to the palace at such a late hour and did not see me, but directly kneeled here. What is the meaning of this?" "I have no other choice, that's why I did this." Prime Minister Su kowtowed and raised his eyes to look at Bailey Jiaju. Since this afternoon, the third prince has been secretly arresting many officials in the imperial court without telling you. Now that the situation outside is in chaos, I have no choice but to come here personally to see you. Bailey Jiaju's expression was indifferent as he listened to his words. That handsome and cold face did not have a trace of expression. If there was really something, it would probably only make people feel a trace of mockery. And as far as I know, The royal family is doing all this because Lordly from the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs investigated a courtyard house today. Prime Minister Su continued in a low voice. Not long ago, Lordly received news that someone outside the city was buying large amounts of steel. Moreover, his actions were very strange, and it was suspected that he was secretly manufacturing large amounts of weapons. Without hesitation, he immediately went outside the city and seized countless weapons. However, because of his recklessness, he mistakenly arrested the little seventh prince and sent him to prison. He did not know the little seventh prince, and did not expect that the owner of the courtyard house was the third princess consort, whom he could not afford to offend. Therefore, tragedy happened. He was arrested by the royal family and sent to prison. The rest of his colleagues were also implicated because of this incident. I don't understand. Did the royal family do this purely to avenge the little seventh prince, or did they want to hide something? Chapter 371. Prime Minister Su's question caused the entire hall to fall into silence. The eunuchs and palace maids did not even dare to raise their heads. Too many things had happened in the palace in the past few days. First, the empress had been secretly banished to the cold palace by the retired emperor. Now, Prime Minister Su was questioning the royal. Prime Minister Su was implying that the third prince was plotting a rebellion. Beligaju glanced at him. His attitude was still nonchalant, even a little condescending. What do you think I'm hiding? Even Prime Minister Su, who had been in the bureaucracy for many years, could not figure out this prince who they had never dared to act rashly. Now that the matter was laid bare, he was still asking him what he was hiding. Prime Minister Su instinctively felt that this matter was not as simple as it seemed, and was thinking of an excuse. He then heard Su Yinamo speak from beside him. Her tone was calm. Privately making weapons is a great crime of rebellion. I don't know why your highness is shielding the culprit and is in such a hurry to destroy the evidence. You didn't even hesitate to arrest the officials of the imperial court. I only ask that the retired emperor be impartial and let the innocent people go. Covering up for the murderer? Bailey Jiaju slowly curved his thin lips. A cold intent seeped out of that smile. Su Yinamo did not know why, but she shuddered inexplicably. However, she still firmly held on to Hellion Wei Wei's guilt. I know that Wei Wei is now His Highness Third Princess Consort. I've also raised this child since she was young, and I've always treated her well. Now that something like this has happened, I've also hesitated to meet the retired emperor. After all, this is the only flesh and blood left behind by my elder sister. However, the mistake she has made this time can no longer be resolved with just a few words of apology. No matter who ordered her to make this batch of weapons, she can't escape the blame. As Su Yinmo's voice fell, Beligage's eyes were extremely cold. Eunuch Sun absolutely believed that if it weren't for the presence of the retired emperor, His Highness could really kill this Madame Su with his bare hands, and there wouldn't even be the slightest trace of blood. Hellion Vivian chuckled and walked slowly towards Su Yinmo. Whether I'm guilty or not, let's put that aside for now. However, there's something I'd like to ask Madame Su and Prime Minister Su. Your people have captured Little Seven. What's going on with this? This is all a mistake. Su Yinmo still wanted to explain. Hellion Vivian slapped the long knife in her hand in front of her. Su Yinmo shuddered, and the rest of her words were silenced by the shock. However, Hellion Wei Wei faced her and smiled. The corners of her mouth carried a vicious aura. Madame Su, please don't tell me that this is all a misunderstanding. Little Seven is a dignified prince. Is he someone you can capture as you please? Su Yinmo was rendered speechless by Hellion Vivian's words. She felt that whatever she said was wrong. Prime Minister Su reacted quickly. Princess, you seem to have misunderstood. It was Li Ming who caught the seventh prince, not us. Is that so? Hellion Vivian smirked. She turned around and met Prime Minister Su's eyes. According to what Prime Minister Su said, Li Ming's visit to the courtyard had nothing to do with you at all, right? Prime Minister Su, how do you explain the close relationship between Li Ming and the Su family? This question sent Prime Minister Su to the edge of a knife. Prime Minister Su thought to himself that he had really underestimated this bastard. He clenched his fists and said calmly, Li Ming is a distant relative of the Su family. However, this doesn't mean anything. Prime Minister Su, are you saying that you had no idea that Li Ming had gone to search my courtyard? Hellion Vivian's voice was cold. Su Yinamo felt a little guilty after hearing her question. However, there was no way she would admit that she knew everything at a time like this. Prime Minister Su was not stupid. He knew that there was something fishy going on. Li Ming must have been following his daughter's orders to investigate that courtyard. Now that things have come to this, the third princess consort's every question is filled with enmity toward us. Just because we are kneeling here and waiting for the retired emperor to punish you? Prime Minister Su asked with a cold smile. He did not wait for Hellion Vivian to answer and turned to look at the retired emperor in high spirits. His voice was old and hoarse. There's no need to say anything else. It's all up to the retired emperor. Upon hearing this, Hellion Vivian laughed. I've always admired Prime Minister Su's ability to distort the truth since I was young. You said from the beginning that Li Ming had no idea that I was the owner of that courtyard when he barged in. Unfortunately, Li Ming has confessed everything. As she spoke, she took out the paper containing the confession. Here is a detailed record of how Li Ming discovered the courtyard house outside the city, and why he insisted on barging in despite knowing that it was my courtyard house, capturing people and stealing goods. Su Yinamo looked at the testimony and felt a little dizzy. She cursed Li Ming in her heart, and the color on her face faded. She never thought that the other party would be unable to hold on so quickly. It had only been 4 to 6 hours. The confident Prime Minister Su started to panic. The situation seemed to be out of his control. Usually, when the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs interrogated a prisoner, it would take at least 1 or 2 days before the results were out. How could it be so fast this time? Eunuch Sunday, the retired emperor, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke. However, his voice was deep and oppressive. Let Prime Minister Su see for himself what's written on it. Yes. Eunuch Sun accepted the order and brought the confession paper in front of Prime Minister Su. Prime Minister Su felt as if he had been slapped in the face in public. He did not even look at the paper and kowtowed loudly. Retired Emperor, no matter what the Su family does or sees, it's all for the sake of peace in the capital. That courtyard is just outside the city. If no one investigates it, with so many weapons, it's only a matter of time before the safety of the retired emperor is threatened. Your humble servant may be so bold as to ask the third princess consort, what's the purpose of her privately mass-producing weapons? Prime Minister Su was very astute. In the end, he was trying to push the blame onto Hellion Wei Wei. After all, they were outside the palace, and she could not possibly smooth things over in front of so many people. However, what he did not expect was that the person who answered him was the retired emperor. His voice was so cold that there was no warmth in it. The weapons that Hellion Vivian manufactured this time are mainly used to defend against foreign enemies. I personally ordered her to rush it. When he heard this, Prime Minister Su's legs had already turned to jelly. His old eyes shook violently. All his previous plans were overturned by this answer and could not be put to any use. He had been an official for so many years, and this was the first time he tasted regret. His body was so stiff that he could not even move his fingers. Su Yinmo's face was completely pale. Her first reaction was, "It's over. It's all over." Chapter 372. Are you satisfied with this answer, Minister Su? The retired emperor glanced at Prime Minister Su. It was that glance that made Prime Minister Su lose all his strength. However, how could it be over at this point? The royal family had yet to speak. Since the rebellion has been settled, let's talk about this confession. Beligaju's voice was indifferent, but it was enough to make one's scalp go numb. Su Yinamo, who gave you the guts to investigate my people? Su Yinmo's body trembled. She had been raised in the boudoir. Even though she had heard about Bailey Jiaju, she had never really confronted him. Now, she could only feel the coldness from him, as if it could drill into the crevices of her bones. Especially his expression, as if he was looking at an ant, was even more unfathomable and terrifying. Su Yinamo did not dare to answer this question. She looked at Prime Minister Su, hoping that her father would save her. Prime Minister Su gritted his teeth and knocked his head on the floor tiles. I was muddle-headed. I thought that someone wanted to rebel, so I risked my life to have an audience with you. I didn't expect it to be a misunderstanding. This daughter of mine is also muddle-headed. When she heard the slightest rumor, she thought that something was wrong, which was why she sent people to investigate. However, she definitely did not have any other intentions. I hope that the retired emperor can be clear about this. Eunuch's son heard this and glanced at the retired emperor subconsciously. The Su family had made a mistake, but it was not a fatal one. Based on Su Yinmo's small mistake, he could not really do anything to her. In addition, the situation in the court was not stable, and the influence of the four influential families. When the master made a decision, he had to consider the overall situation. It was because of this that Prime Minister Su had raised his voice so loudly. The retired emperor laughed coldly in his heart. He lowered his eyes and said, "Now that things have come to this, Minister Su, you can't let this go just because of a misunderstanding." Yes, Prime Minister Su kowtowed heavily again. His forehead was bruised, and he looked pathetic. He no longer had the arrogance that he usually had. I was wrong. Su Yinamo looked at her father, who had never suffered before. Tears started to flow out of her eyes as she clenched her fists tightly. She was extremely sullen. The retired emperor lowered his eyes and continued. Since Wei Wei was wrongly accused, let a Jew handle this matter. A Jew, remember, don't make things too difficult for Minister Su. As he spoke, he turned around and entered the hall, leaving Eunuch's son to Beligaju. Su Yinamo heaved a sigh of relief and smirked. Since the Emperor Emeritus had spoken and asked them not to make things too difficult for them, then it was definitely not a big deal. She had said that no matter what happened, she would not do anything. No matter how smart that little bastard Hellion Vivian was, she could only suffer in silence in the end. However, Su Yinamo had underestimated one thing. That was Beligaju's way of killing without spilling blood. What did the royal family rely on to get to where they were today? Was it true that he could punish whoever he wanted? Wrong. But even if he played someone to death, that person would not be able to find fault with Beligaju. Usually, one sentence from him could peel off a layer of skin from a person. Su Yinamo did not know, but it did not mean that Prime Minister Su did not know. He had not forgotten that it was the third prince's idea that his granddaughter was betrothed to the Huai family. It was said to be a gift from the royal family, but in reality, it was to let his granddaughter marry into the Huai family and live as a widow. Thinking about it carefully, it was also from then on that the Su family had led a life of misfortune. Thinking of this, Prime Minister Su felt a chill in his heart, as if he suddenly thought of something. Looking at Beligaju, who was gradually approaching him, there was a moment of horror on his face. He finally knew what was wrong. If such a smart person like the royal family really wanted to stand up for the seventh prince, he could have brought Li Ming directly to the Su family and let them give the seventh prince an explanation. But he did not do that. Instead, while destroying the Su family's connections, he also acted as if he wanted to destroy the evidence, so that they would misunderstand the origin of the batch of weapons. He deliberately misled them, so that they would think that there was an opportunity to take advantage of. From the beginning, this was a trap, and the ultimate goal of this trap was to drag him into it. If he did not suspect the batch of weapons, no matter what his daughter said, Prime Minister Su would not have followed her into the palace. Then, everything would not have ended up in this situation. While Prime Minister Su had a sudden realization, he could only feel an uncontrollable fear. His fingers trembled as he wanted to leave, as if the person walking towards him was not a human, but a demon from hell. In contrast to Prime Minister Su's obvious fear, Beligaju showed his unparalleled gentleness. His thin lips were slightly raised, as if there was a smile. Since royal grandfather did not ask me to make things difficult for Prime Minister Su, I will not punish you, Prime Minister Su. But since Prime Minister Su likes to kneel so much, then continue kneeling. You can leave when the sun comes up. What? Before Prime Minister Su could say anything, Su Yinamo, who was beside him, almost screamed. The sky had just darkened. There was still one more night before the sun came up. Her father was already so old. Even if he had martial chi to protect his body, kneeling for one night was enough to take his life. Moreover, the wind had started to pick up, so it would definitely rain soon. How could her father take it? This royal family did not mean that they would not punish him. They clearly wanted her father to die outside the palace gates. But it was such an insidious method that she could not even find a reason to refute. Prime Minister Su had obviously accepted his fate. His two old hands were clenched tightly, his teeth clenched, and he said, "Yes." Eunuch Sunday Beligaju continued, his voice neither cold nor indifferent, put up Lord Li Ming's confession on the city gates as a warning to all the officials. Don't let something like this happen again. Yes. Eunuch Sun accepted the order and left. Su Yinmo's face turned pale again. If it was put up on the city gates, wouldn't everyone in the capital be able to see it? How was she going to face others in the future? As for Madame Su, Beligaju played with the ring on his pinky finger slowly. He looked like he was smiling, but his eyes were cold and penetrating. She is Prime Minister Su's daughter after all. It's not good to punish her too heavily. Just do a casual self-reflection during the parade. Parade? When Madame Su heard these two words, she was so angry that she fainted on the spot. Her eyes were filled with humiliation. She was so angry that her whole body was trembling, but she did not dare to say anything. She could only watch as her hands were cuffed and then led out of the palace. Hellion Vivian saw that they were gone. Then she had the chance to approach Beligaju. Chapter 373. Parade through the streets? Reflect on yourself? How did His Highness come up with such an idea? It was too sinister. Beligaju looked at her eyes that were much clearer than usual, and his thin lips curled. What's wrong? Is this not a good idea? No. She just wanted to know how His Highness's brain worked. He could even think of such a sinister idea. Moreover, she had not even done anything this time, and the other party had already wilted. Even Prime Minister Su could not escape the fate of being slapped in the face in public. She felt relieved watching from the side. This was all thanks to the man in front of her. Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju again and continued in a clear voice, "It's very satisfying. As long as it's satisfying." Bailey Jiaju's tone was neither fast nor slow. It really didn't seem like he was teaching people to do bad things, but the words he said made people's feet slip. Your methods are too inexperienced. What's slapping yourself in the face? It's just a matter of pain. If you want to take revenge, you have to let her remember this humiliation for the rest of her life. Hellion Vivian nodded her head as she listened. It was rare to see such a black-bellied person like the royal. However, was it really a good idea for him to teach her so many tricks? Didn't he say that he hated women who were scheming and only liked innocence? Why did she always feel that His Highness did not follow the script? Beligaju glanced at his belongings, who were rarely obedient, and reached out to pull her over. There was a gentle smile on his lips. Hellion Vivian's mind was still stuck on the words just now. Naturally, she did not pay much attention to the man's actions and missed the faint smile on Beligaju's lips. People came and went in the old streets of the capital. Regardless of whether they were from noble families or ordinary people, they would all come to the streets at this time. Look, who's that? I think it's the Madam of the General's residence. Someone in the crowd recognized Madame Su and shouted, "Let's go and have a look." Su Yinmo's left hand was fastened to the prison wagon as she made a self-criticism in front of everyone. Hundreds of people were listening to her recitation below. Every word and sentence could be heard clearly in the huge Chong and street, as if it was an echo. Everyone looked at her and laughed. Su Yinmo felt her face burning up. She did not need to touch it to know that it was boiling hot. She had never been humiliated like this in front of so many people in her life. It felt like she was being exposed in front of everyone. Sk, I really didn't expect that the dignified madam of the Hellion family would actually have such a vicious stepmother. Normally, seeing her abstain from meat and pray to Buddha, I really thought that she was a good person. Su Yinmo, who had been in a high position all this while, gritted her teeth so hard that they broke. After she finished reading the content on the rice paper, her voice was choked with sobs. However, The shadow guards who were carrying out the task did not let her off and made her repeat it 10 times. Su Yinmo's face alternated between red and white. She lowered her eyes to hide the resentment in them. Even though she was unwilling, she could only bite her lip and continue to recite. Among the spectators, there was no lack of people from the Hellion family. Seeing Su Yinmo in such a state, they only felt that they had lost all face. Therefore, even after Su Yinmo had finished reciting her self-reflection 10 times, no one was willing to come and pick her up. Now, the people of the Hellion family were afraid that someone would find out that they were related to Su Yinmo. Everyone was hiding far away. Su Yinmo had no choice. In the past, she was always picked up when she went in and out of the house. This time, she could only lower her head and walk back to the general's residence on her own while listening to the whispers around her. That feeling was even more unbearable than killing her. The Hellion Jiaoer, who was in Iyun restaurant, did not know what was going on. She was just composing a poem with the young ladies of the official family when suddenly, 2 people started pointing at her and gossiping. She could clearly feel that the gazes of the people around her had changed. That kind of mockery was mixed with shallow laughter, as if they were looking at a clown. The Hellion Jiaoer had not been having a good time recently. Seeing such a scene, she could not hold it in anymore. She did not even say a word of farewell and went home crying. However, what she did not expect was that the atmosphere at home was the same. Those maids and servants who usually did not even dare to look at her gathered together after she walked past them. She did not know what they were talking about. In the past, Hellion Jiaoer still had a personal servant girl, but now she was all alone. She didn't even have a convenient person to use. The feeling of humiliation in her heart became even heavier. She entered the room and smashed the things in the room. Su Yinmo saw this scene when she came back. Usually, she would still have the mood to coax the Hellion Jiaoer. But today, she was really tired. More than tired. She had never been in such a sorry state before. Her hair, which she had specially combed because she was going to enter the palace, was now disheveled. She was a person who usually paid attention to her manners, especially when it came to maintenance. She would not let her feet touch the ground if she could. Back then, because she knew that ambergris had the effect of smelling feet, she deliberately cut off the use of Hellion bitch. Now, this pair of jade feet, which she took care of so much, was worn down to the point that it hurt when she moved. All of this was because of that little bastard. Su Yinmo clenched her hands tightly and slammed them on the wall with a bang. She looked like a crazy woman who had lost her mind. The Hellion Jiaoer had never seen Su Yinmo like this. In her impression, Su Yinmo had always been a person who would not allow herself to be stained with dirt. Looking at Su Yinmo now, she was covered in dust. Her cloth shoes were so dirty that they were beyond recognition, not to mention her performance. The Hellion Jiaoer instinctively felt repulsed. Mother, what happened to you? Review. I've been doing a review on the streets all day. Su Yinmo lowered her hands. The Hellion Jiaoer could not believe what she had heard. What did you say? What review? Didn't her mother and grandfather enter the palace to suppress that little bitch Hellion Vivian? Even if she had to do a review, it should be that little bitch. She had committed a serious crime of rebellion. What did it have to do with her mother? Su Yinmo covered her face and told him everything that had happened. The Hellion Jiaoer finally understood why those people outside looked at her that way. Parade. She actually had a mother who paraded the streets. This was destined to be a disgrace to her. In the future, when people talked about her, they would definitely say, "Look at this person. She has a mother who paraded the streets. How could this happen?" The Hellion Jiaoer shouted, "Didn't you say that everything would be foolproof? What happened in the end? You were actually dragged to a parade. Mother, have you ever thought about how I will face you in the future if you do this?" If it was in the past, Su Yinmo would have slapped Hellion Jiaoer for speaking to her like this. However, she only had one daughter now. She panicked and grabbed Hellion Jiaoer's hand. She said anxiously, "Jiaoer, wait a little longer. When the third prince chooses his secondary consort, with your beauty and looks, you will definitely stand out." Chapter 374. Will the third prince still choose a secondary consort? Helian Jiaoer cried until her face was a mess. Even if he does choose, will I still have a chance? Su Yenimo took a deep breath and finally stabilized her emotions. She hurriedly replied, Yes, yes. Have you forgotten? In our Dragon War Empire, if the crown prince is appointed, he must choose a woman who is outstanding in all aspects to assist him in his 20s. Even though Wei Wei, that vile spawn, had recovered her chi and wasn't as useless as before, that face of hers was still far from having the qualifications to be outstanding. Third prince was retired emperor's designated candidate to be the heir apparent. If he didn't choose a girl who was absolutely perfect, then he would have to give up that throne that was within reach. He will not be so stupid. Helian Jiaoer heard this and her eyes lit up with hope. But my reputation now. Jiaoer, remember, you are the phoenix girl chosen by the 4 great clans. Your bad reputation is only temporary. We will return all the humiliation to that bastard in the real selection ceremony. The more Madame Su spoke, the more vicious her expression became. Her fingers clenched so tightly that they sank into her palms. Helian Jiaoer was still crying. Then what should I do during this period of time? I will be gossiped about as soon as I go out. Those gossipy women, Madame Su scolded, but in her heart, she had the same thoughts as Helian Jiaoer. She lowered her eyes and said, Let's go to Chengda and stay there for 2 days. Your grandfather still has a house there. The third prince is almost old, but there are still a few more days. We will come back when the capital is calm. Helian Jiaoer also thought that this was a good idea and nodded slightly. Madame Su stroked her beloved daughter's long hair, but the hatred in her eyes did not subside. After she comforted Helian Jiaoer, she wanted to give some money to the imperial palace so that they could think of a way to plead for Prime Minister Su. However, this time, no one accepted her. Everyone refused to see her. Su Yenimo panicked and ordered the butler to look for Helian Guangyao. At this time, Helian Guangyao was in the small building with Lan Lian in his arms, drinking wine with the officials who had a good relationship with him. He saw someone coming in from outside. That person had never seen eye to eye with Helian Guangyao. Now that he saw how well Helian Guangyao was living, he was very surprised and opened his mouth. Brother Guangyao, don't tell me you still don't know? Helian Guangyao sneered, with a rather lofty attitude. What should I know? Your official wife, Su Yenimo, has just finished touring the streets? As the man spoke, he laughed. Your wife even read the letter of self-criticism. Quite a few people gathered around to watch the show. When the officials present heard the 2 words parade, they pricked up their ears. When that person finished explaining the cause and effect, they all looked at Helian Guangyao one after another, with a trace of discomfort in their gazes. Helian Guangyao's mind went blank for a moment. Then, the hand on his leg slowly clenched. He finally understood what was going on. That woman was acting on her own again. How many times had he told her to bear with it? Bear with it. But she refused to listen and insisted on making a scene to this point. Even he was embarrassed. There were so many officials present. Which one of them had a wife who was touring the streets? Helian Guangyao could no longer sit still. It was not because of anything else, but the sense of mockery that was intentionally or unintentionally glanced at him almost made him want to smash his cup on the spot. These people, which one of them was not inferior to him in the past and rushed to curry favor with him, now, they looked at him as if they were looking at a circus monkey. Helian Guangyao knew that the more it was like this, the more he could not lose his temper. That would only make him a bigger joke. He stood up with a cold face, ordered the people around him, and was about to leave. At this moment, the woman named Lan Lian pulled him back, with a shy and gentle expression on her face. Sir, take everything easy. Helian Guangyao could not help but pull the woman in front of him into his arms again. He thought in his heart that if that old woman at home could be half as considerate as Lian Air, he would not have suffered so much outside. The night deepened even further. Whenever she thought of Prime Minister Su kneeling outside the palace, Su Yenimo could not sleep at all. She waited and waited, hoping that Helian Guangyao would come back to help her. Finally, she managed to get Helian Guangyao to come, but he gave her a tight slap in the face. How many times have I told you? When the clan meeting ends, that little bastard will be eliminated. You just had to make a scene, And now, the general's residence is completely disgraced because of you." Helian Guangyao vented all the anger he had suffered outside on Su Yinmo. Su Yinmo's face was swollen from the slap, but she did not dare to say anything. She only held Helian Guangyao's hand and said, "Father is still kneeling in the palace now. He's already so old. I'm afraid that he won't be able to make it." Helian Guangyao suppressed the anger in his chest. He was tired of Su Yinmo's crying. But no matter what, they were grasshoppers tied to the same rope, bound together for good or ill. Moreover, although the Su family's spies in the capital were gone, their military power was still there. He still needed Prime Minister Su's support, so he would not reject this rescue mission. At the very least, he had to go through the formalities so that Su Yinmo would take note of it, and he would be able to answer to Prime Minister Su when he came out. Su Yinmo did not know that Helian Guangyao had such a mindset. Seeing how much money he took out, she thought that he had put in a lot of effort to save the people. She did not expect that Helian Guangyao only used a small portion of the money to pull strings, and the rest was given to Lan Lian in the small building. It was about to rain heavily outside, but Prime Minister Su was still kneeling in the same position. His breath was getting weaker, and even his face was turning pale. He knelt stiffly until the next morning. During the morning assembly, his colleagues all shook their heads at him when they passed by him. Prime Minister Su did not expect that he, who was supposed to be in power and enjoying his old age, would suffer such humiliation. He fainted in a fit of anger. When he opened his eyes again, he could no longer feel his left leg. If he wanted to walk again, he would have to use a wooden crutch. How could Prime Minister Su take this lying down? However, he had to swallow it even if he could not. Beligage's method was too vicious. Even if he argued in the imperial court, he would not be able to find any fault with him. Even if he was aggrieved, he could only endure it. Helian Guangyao knew how to conduct himself. When he saw Prime Minister Su coming out, he went to the Su residence on the same day. Prime Minister Su looked at him and took a deep breath. "I have underestimated that girl of yours. I, Helian Guangyao, have never had such a vile spawn who despises the family." Helian Guangyao sneered in disgust. "Father-in-law, don't worry. She will not get what she wants no matter how hard she tries. When the day of the Helian family's clan meeting comes, she will know the consequences of offending both of us." Chapter 375. Furthermore, Helian Guangyao paused for a moment. His voice was much gloomier than usual. "That vile spawn is most likely possessed. Once she shows her true form, she'll lose everything she relies on. At that time, even if we propose to burn her alive, retired emperor won't say anything. Maybe he'll hate that little vile spawn even more than we do. I have already made arrangements at the academy. During this period of time, the mountain will not be peaceful. The aura of the possessed person will also become unstable. Father-in-law, just wait and see. That little vile spawn will definitely reveal her fatal flaws." At night, the cold wind blew from all directions, and a light drizzle began to fall in the academy. Helian Vivian automatically shrank towards a warm place and slept even more deeply than before. Probably because she was too tired during this period of time, she did not feel anything in the first half of the night, but in the latter half of the night, she kept feeling that someone was calling her. She did not wake up and laid on the bed. Her eyebrows were tightly knitted, as if she had seen something very bad. Helian Wei didn't know how she ended up in a gloomy courtyard. That courtyard was hung with large lanterns. She could faintly hear someone crying. She subconsciously looked left and right. When she walked over, it was as if she was stepping on cotton. It was not so real. As she walked, she felt that something was not right. Even if she did not have martial qi, with her physical strength, it was impossible for her to be such a loser. With every step she took, the weight on her shoulders increased. It was as if someone was constantly adding weight to her body. After walking for an unknown amount of time, Helian Vivian decided to stop. She knew that if she continued to walk, the situation would not be good for her. Although her head was a little dizzy, Helian Vivian was not an ordinary person. She had received precise training. Her ability to resist anesthesia was well known in both the underworld and the underworld. Soon, She found the problem. This place was not normal. Because this place was not the slightest bit different from the place she had started from. This time, she did not continue to walk forward. Hellion Vivian tried hard to gather her disrupted thoughts. Vaguely, she seemed to know that this was not a real place. She was dreaming. However, this dream was so long that she didn't wake up as easily as the previous few flashes. In modern times, many people spend a lot of energy because they often dream. She had the same feeling now, and she knew that all of this was far from over. This was because a woman who looked exactly like her appeared in front of her. The only difference was that the woman's eyes were much dimmer than hers. Her face also carried a pitiful aura. Her body was wet as if she had just climbed out of the lake. She swayed by the lake as she looked at her and said in a mournful voice, "Why didn't you return my body to me? Why whoosh?" Hellion Vivian suddenly opened her eyes and looked at the man who pushed the wet hair away from her forehead. She was stunned for a moment. "It's you. This kind of dream is really uncomfortable. You had a nightmare." Bailey Jiaju leaned forward and looked at her. His eyes were indifferent, and he was dressed differently from his usual attire. Perhaps it was because he had regained his identity, he was no longer wearing the youthful scholar attire. Instead, he was draped in a waist-length Kangwoo mountain silver jade robe. His facial features were exquisite, and his skin was excessively fair. When one looked at him up close, he always had the ability to mesmerize people, especially his pair of beautiful eyes, which seemed to be shining at this moment. "What did you dream of?" "Nothing." Hellion Vivian naturally would not tell him about the real owner of this body. She stretched her back and felt inexplicably guilty. Comrade Little White, who had always been known as the most indifferent comrade in the world, was irritable. No matter what, it was still the prince of the cat clan. Although it was still in the form of an animal, it did not believe that this perverted man could not see through its identity with his eyesight. He did it on purpose, Hellion Vivian also did not immediately react. Castrated? Heavens, castrate. Did this mean that Little White would become extinct? Wait a minute. Hellion Vivian was anxious. She did not care whether the royal was obsessed with cleanliness. She directly pressed Beligaju's hand. "You can't castrate it." Chapter 376. Beligaju glanced at the hand on the back of his hand, and a smile appeared on his handsome face. "Why can't I castrate it? And why? Didn't His Highness think that his decision to castrate the cat was very strange?" Hellion Vivian hugged the blanket and sat cross-legged. "It's my spiritual creature." As its owner, she couldn't watch her spiritual creature go extinct. Beligaju retracted his hand and said indifferently, "It's fine if you don't castrate it, but don't let me see it sleeping on your bed in the future." "Just because of this?" Hellion Vivian immediately nodded, thinking that His Highness's misophobia was serious again. She had to keep Little White away from him in the future. Beligaju gently patted Little White's cat face with one hand, and then brought it out of the door. There was a faint smile on the man's face. "If there's nothing, don't come out of the space casually, understand?" Meow. As the cat prince, it only wanted to go to its master to seek comfort. Beligaju looked at it with a smile. "If I find out that you are close to her again, I will break your cat legs." Almost instantly, the white cat entered the fantasy space. What a cunning man. It couldn't provoke him, but it could hide. His Highness was very satisfied with this. At this time, Fire Cheelin appeared and leaned over to Beligaju's ear and said, "Master, Miss Hellion Vivian's aura seems to be very unstable. We don't know the reason yet, but I think it should be related to her choice of devil and chi dual cultivation." And Beligaju wasn't surprised. He obviously noticed it too. His expression was noble and indifferent. "Her aura is unstable. Other than cultivation, it is also related to the environment. The aura of the White Academy is not right. There must be something interfering. Go to the back of the mountain and check if there are any remaining demonic beasts." Yes. As expected of its master, he was so sharp. The Fire Cheelin sighed and disappeared into the night. Hellion Vivian didn't know what Little White said when it was brought out by the royal. She guessed that they were teaching it a lesson about not jumping onto the quilt when it was dirty in the future. Beligaju walked in again and glanced at her who was sitting on the bed. Then, he unhurriedly unbuttoned his outer shirt. His fingers were slender and beautiful, and his every move made people unable to take their eyes off him. After Qing Zhan came in, he fetched hot water for him. Although he didn't dare to serve him personally, he still had to pass him a towel. Beligaju took the wet towel from his hand and wiped his face. He then took the peppermint water and drank a mouthful before spitting it out. He looked like he was preparing to sleep. This made Hellion Vivian raise her eyebrows. This seemed to be her room. Did he come to the wrong place? Hellion Vivian was still holding the quilt in her hands. Her eyes watched Beligaju take off the things on his body bit by bit. Then, he turned his face and unbuttoned his sleeves. His eyes were still on her. Hellion Wei Wei kept feeling the restlessness in her body. She was somewhat restless, so she simply turned her head and plastered herself against the ice-cold wall. She still wanted to continue sleeping to conserve some energy. However, in the next second, that familiar sandalwood smell came from behind her. Hellion Vivian didn't need to look back to know that Beligaju was on the bed. She could only shrink back. But the quilt was on the man's side. After it rained, the room would be a little cold. Hellion Vivian only persisted for a while. She raised her eyebrows at Beligaju. Quilt, you want it? Beligaju didn't lie down. Instead, he leaned against the bed. He held the ancient scroll in one hand and looked at Hellion Vivian lazily. It was as if he was looking at his own property. He put down the ancient scroll unhurriedly. Then come a little closer. Am I a flood beast? You have to hide at the foot of the wall. Hellion Vivian thought in her heart. It's not that you are a flood beast. She was afraid that she couldn't control herself and really pounced on the royal. That would be terrible. Come here. Beligaju repeated his order. Hellion Vivian muttered. You have your own bed. Why do you have to snatch my quilt? Then, she moved to the other side. If she seriously studied it, it was indeed very comfortable to sleep like this. The man's smell was very pleasant. It was like a subtle hypnosis. He seemed to like her hair very much. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. The comfort of his touch was also very good. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. Since the royal had the habit of hugging a pillow to sleep, she would just pretend to do it for once. She wouldn't lose much weight. The main reason was because it was comfortable. How could a man's body be so good? Not only did he look good, but he was also very suitable to use. No wonder those boys and girls coveted him so much. Hellion Wei Wei sighed. When a man looks good, he's even more of a scourge than a woman. Beligaju didn't know what she was thinking. If he knew, he would probably bully her again. He hugged Hellion Vivian and touched his prey's head. He felt the soft and thin fur under his hand. There was a smile in his eyes, as if he was very satisfied. In fact, Beligaju was very satisfied. He liked the feeling of hugging Hellion Vivian. To a certain extent, Beligaju liked the feeling of being relied on by this little fox. It was just that he was very picky about this specific prey. So far, only Hellion Vivian had the softness of a soft jade under his hands. Furthermore, when he hugged her in his arms, every part of her was soft. The kind of deep feeling that the softer she was, the more he wanted to pinch her. This had always been in Beligaju's mind. Until the two of them fell asleep. When it was almost dawn, Beligaju still maintained this position. He used something hot to rub against Hellion Vivian back and forth. Hellion Vivian instantly woke up. She bit her thin lips. This is, however, Beligaju did not wake up. He only instinctively furrowed his beautiful long eyebrows. His breathing changed a little. He used more strength to hold Hellion Wei Wei's hand and pressed her whole body against his body. His eyes were tightly shut, and his eyelashes were so long that it made people jealous. Hellion Vivian could even feel that hot thing rubbing against her body, causing her to feel numb. Then, Beligaju even reached in with his legs. This time, he was even closer to her. Hellion Vivian only felt that the places he touched were on fire. The two of them were covered with a blanket. At this moment, any movement of Beligaju's would inevitably bring out some soft rustling sounds. Hellion Vivian's ears were completely red. She wanted to push him away, but the man's hot breath blew into her neck, causing her to involuntarily shiver. Chapter 377. Is this even possible? He's so hard and hot even when he's dreaming. Hellion Vivian clenched her fists and realized that her body was soft. Damn it. She definitely couldn't see a certain someone on the day of the full moon. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to control herself and would really press him down. After adjusting her breathing, Hellion Vivian slowly relaxed her body. Forget it. I'll just treat it as rejecting the practice in advance. With this thought, the sleepy Hellion Vivian fell into a deep sleep again. After a while, Beligaju woke up, as if he had realized something and was stunned for a moment. Then, his thin lips curled up and there was a unique, devilish look in his eyes. There wasn't the slightest bit of embarrassment, but instead, there was a faint sense of satisfaction. Then, he strode out with his long legs and left the blanket to clean up. When he came back, he looked at Hellion Vivian again and reached out to pull her over. The royal seemed to be very satisfied with this kind of circling behavior. He gently sniffed Hellion Vivian's long hair. He liked to leave his scent on her body. This was how it should be. Prey that belonged to him should be tainted with his scent. An indescribable comfort made Beligaju tighten his grip on Hellion Vivian. He decided to leave a few more marks on her body in the future. Hellion Vivian still didn't know about a certain highness' future plans. If she knew, she would definitely scold Beligaju, who would treat this kind of thing as a declaration of their territory. Only the royal would be so perverted. Beligaju stared at Hellion Vivian for a long while. His fingers couldn't help but stroke the corner of Hellion Vivian's lips, and his eyes darkened. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that Hellion Vivian's face was a little hotter and her breathing was heavier. It was very likely because he wanted her last time. In addition, she was a demon, so she was more and more sensitive to his touch. For a man, this kind of thing only had benefits and no disadvantages. That also meant that she would be at his mercy. Heh, what a wonderful thing. Beligaju paused for a moment. The finger that was rubbing Hellion Vivian's thin lips slowly moved down. As expected, Hellion Vivian's eyelashes fluttered, but she didn't quite wake up from her stupor. Beligaju's eyes darkened when he heard this. He rubbed the softness in his palms and kissed Hellion Vivian's lips passionately. He felt his entire body burning up, and the sound of him swallowing his saliva was frighteningly loud. He held onto Hellion Vivian's waist and finally pried open her mouth a little. He stuck his tongue in and licked her. At this moment, both of them were trembling. Bailey Jiaju's eyes darkened as he licked her soft little tongue with the tip of his tongue, preventing it from escaping. While Hellion Weiwei was sleeping, he took advantage of the opportunity to bully her again. Although he didn't reach the end, he still kissed the places that he should kiss. The thick scent of musk filled the entire room. Beligaju rested his chin on Hellion Vivian's head, and the corner of his mouth curled into a devilish smile. Since she was so sensitive, it was certain that they would have to do dual cultivation soon. What should he do? The more he thought about it, the more he wanted to see her crying and begging for mercy under him. Pitter-patter. Outside the window, the sky gradually became foggy. The rainwater pressed down on the bushes, dripping onto the bluestone path. Beside the green dragon lake, a man held a folded umbrella with his fair and transparent fingers. His slender back revealed a sense of coldness. He slowly retracted his gaze from the lake and rested it on Yun Biluo, who was standing behind him. His voice was calm as he said, "This time, because of your careless leak of information, our forces have been reduced by more than half." As he spoke, his dark eyes narrowed. Yun Biluo immediately spat out a mouthful of black blood. She reached out and stroked her left shoulder. Her face was extremely pale, but there was a strong sense of unwillingness in her eyes. She originally thought that as long as she exposed the fact that Hellion Vivian was making weapons, the other party would definitely die without a burial place. However, she never expected that the person who asked her to make the weapons was the retired emperor. "Young master, please give me another chance." Yun Biluo looked up, and there was gentleness on her palm-sized face. "This time, I miscalculated. I shouldn't have wasted my time on these things." Instead, I should have thought of a way to win back His Highness' heart." Upon hearing this, the man glanced at her. "Do you really think that Beligaju married Hellion Vivian just to appease the retired emperor?" Yun Biluo suddenly froze. She had been asking herself this question since she came back. Although the answer was somewhat different from what she expected, it was not that bad. She thought for a while and said, "No, he chose Hellion Vivian first because he was interested in Hellion Vivian. However, I want to say that he was only interested in Hellion Vivian. There was nothing special about it. Perhaps it was because Hellion Vivian woke up and was different from before, which made His Highness feel strange. He had always been a person who liked to treat rare things as prey. Especially the more unruly the other party was, the more interested he was. When he really got what he wanted, he wouldn't care anymore. I've been with him for so many years. I know His Highness better than anyone else. I also know what his weakness is. Young Master wants Hellion Vivian to leave His Highness, and only I can do this. I can give you another chance, but—" The man glanced at her, then pulled open his collar and crossed his legs elegantly. His eyes were full of indifference. "I won't let anyone else see you do anything bad to Hellion Vivian." "Yes." Yun Biluo held back her unwillingness and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her body began to become lighter and lighter. She knew that her soul was being separated from her body. The man looked at her and slightly bent one of his hands. A black talisman appeared in his palm. He stuck the talisman in the middle of her forehead and chanted some incantation. His fingertips emitted a faint white light, which was firmly embedded into Yun Biluo's body along with the talisman. As the black talisman was implanted, a golden light overflowed from Yun Biluo's left shoulder, which was then slowly filled by the black fog. Layers of tentacles grew, and the best part was that the tentacles interweaved into perfect flesh, making her look like she was never hurt. At this moment, the man withdrew his arm and said in a faint voice, "You don't have to ambush the battle spirit forces anymore. Go and get close to Beligaju. It's best that you can continue your childhood friendship as you said." Hearing the word fate, Yun Biluo clenched her fists. Her eyes were filled with determination. "Young Master, don't worry. I know what I should do." "That's good." The man turned around and walked into the rising fog on the lake. His back view was as beautiful as an ink painting master. The demon-transforming beast followed the man and did not reveal itself. It only spoke when Yun Biluo's figure could no longer be seen. "Why do you have to get Hellion Vivian?" Chapter 378. What was so good about that woman? Although she was a little smart, she looked too tough. A person who could kill the demon-transforming beast was not someone to be trifled with. The man smiled as if he was out of this world. His eyes were deep as if he was hiding something. He did not answer the demon-transforming beast. Instead, he looked at the sleeping green dragon in the lake and said, "You don't have enough resentment." As soon as he finished his sentence, he moved his finger. Black blood dripped from his fingertip into the lake. Drop by drop, it was as if he had knocked on the door of evil. A gloomy voice came out from his thin lips. The ancient spell made the demon-transforming beast excited. Finally, it finally saw its master make a move. The man glanced at it. His eyes were overflowing with thick black fog. "Go, you're hungry too." "Yes." The demon-transforming beast licked its lips. With a flash of its scarlet eyes, it disappeared into the dark night. It smelled the human's greed and immediately found its target. It opened its mouth and bit that person. In the darkness, the faint sound of blood being sucked could be heard. Crack! Hellion Vivian was lying on the bed. She was in a trance. She could not describe the trance. When she opened her eyes, she realized that she was the only one left on the bed. When she turned around, she realized that this was not the bed. Instead, it was the lakeside. The lake was very familiar. It was so familiar that she could recognize where she was at first glance. Wasn't this the lake that trapped Green Dragon? Why was she here? Hadn't she been lying on the bed without moving all this while? Crack! The sound was still ringing in her ears. Hellion Vivian subconsciously tightened her grip on the dagger that she always carried with her. She slowly walked towards the lake. Crack! The sound stopped abruptly. The silence at the foot of the mountain made her feel even more uneasy, especially the color of the lake. It gave her a dark and gloomy feeling at night. Hellion Vivian pressed on the dagger. She felt that her breathing was a little slow. She felt a chill on her back as if something was sticking to her. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian turned around abruptly. A faceless face was right in front of him. Other than a pair of bright red lips, there were no other facial features. Hellion Vivian's scalp tightened. She stood up abruptly, only to realize that it was all just a dream. It was just that the dream was too real. It was so real that she felt a little weak in her arms and legs. Hellion Vivian raised her hand to tuck the hair beside her ear that was wet with cold sweat. She subconsciously wanted to grab the quilt in her arms, but strangely, it didn't feel as soft as usual. Instead, it felt a little sticky. Hellion Vivian retracted her gaze and looked down as well. What was in her arms was not a blanket, but a face without facial features. The mouth of the face opened and closed, repeating the same sentence. "Give me back my body. Give me back my body. Don't come over." Hellion Vivian shouted. She was completely awakened. Beligaju's hand was still stretched out. He probably wanted to shake her awake, but after hearing her words, his hand stopped in midair. Hellion Vivian sat up straight. Only then did she realize that she was still in her room. So it was a dream within a dream. But this kind of dream could easily make people absent-minded. In just one night, she had 3 dreams in a row. Moreover, each dream was related to this body. Was it a coincidence? Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. She was obviously absent-minded. Yuan Ming came out at this time to annoy her. How could it be a coincidence? Woman, you underestimate the influence of this body on you. As Yuan Ming spoke, he casually took a bite of the crisp apple in the fantasy space. Hellion Wei Wei glanced at him and pretended that she wanted to burn the ancient book. Tell me, other than prying into my privacy, what else can you do? You, calm down a bit. Yuan Ming looked at her movements and spoke in a soft tone. I am your devil's emissary. When you are in danger, of course I have to support the defense function. I am not prying into your privacy, but this dream of yours is unusual. I have to pull you out of the dream. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. So, from my dream, besides analyzing that it is related to the dual cultivation day, what else did you analyze? White Academy will not be peaceful recently. Yuan Ming's eyes glowed. You wouldn't have a nightmare for no reason. There must be some kind of unusual resentment around you. But I don't know why you would have such a dream. What did the last sentence mean? Why did it want you to return your body to it? Because the real Hellion Vivian wanted to come back. Hellion Vivian looked at the scenery outside the window. She did not know where her thoughts stopped. All along, she had thought that the owner of this body had died a long time ago. That was why she was able to reside in this body. Now, it seemed that the real Hellion Wei Wei had not left. Instead, she was sleeping in this body, waiting for the right time to wake up. If that was the case, where would she go? Back to the 21st century? What would happen when the time came? Bailey Jiaju did not know what was on Hellion Wei Wei's mind. He could only watch her wake up from her nightmares one after another. His pair of long and narrow eyes darkened. Vaguely, the earth seemed to shake a little, as if something was crawling out from the depths of the earth. Yuan Ming instantly sensed this peculiar aura and suddenly stopped speaking. Fire Qilin leaped from a few meters away and transformed into a physical body. Its fiery red fur appeared very noble. Its eyes looked into the distance. Its large tail drooped down on the ground, but its eyes turned into a dazzling gold. Fire Qilin had never transformed into a physical body without being summoned like today. Beligaju naturally noticed its abnormality. He opened his eyes and glanced in its direction. Fire Qilin opened its mouth and used martial qi to communicate with Beligaju. There should be something that was released. It's in White Academy. Hearing that, Beligaju slowly narrowed his eyes. That handsome face with distinct edges and corners was exquisite and perfect like a diamond, but it also revealed an unprecedented chill. However, he did not care much about what was released. Instead, his tone was slightly cold. If a person who has been possessed frequently has nightmares, in most cases, what is the reason? Fire Qilin felt that it was somewhat unable to follow its master's train of thought. However, it still thought very carefully for a moment and then said, "That is the phenomenon of the soul fighting. The soul is trying to counterattack." Soul counterattack? In other words, the current Hellion Vivian would disappear. Chapter 379. Beligaju's fingers paused and his eyes darkened completely. No matter who the other party was, this feeling of wanting to steal his prey away secretly, it made him very, very unhappy. Beligaju smiled coldly and slowly reached out his hand, only to hear a clang. The sound stopped abruptly. The wall in the corner shattered and a large piece of wall dust fell down. Hellion Vivian turned around, her eyes full of confusion. What was wrong with His Highness? Hellion Vivian was still at the stage of, if the other party knew that she was the one who was possessed, would they treat her like a monster and roast her like a kebab? She would never have thought that Beligaju's anger this time was entirely because someone had set their sights on her. Fire Qilin's thick claws stepped on the ground. It did not understand what its master meant. Bailey Jiaju strolled over and stood in front of it, full of murderous aura. His whole body emitted an indescribable coldness and cruelty. He lifted his eyelids, his ink-black hair fluttered in the wind, and his black, jade-like pupils slightly raised. "Go and find out who tampered with the qi in this courtyard." Yes. Fire Qilin lowered its head, but in its heart, it felt that this matter was not that simple. The rain outside was still pitter-pattering. Hellion Vivian pressed her forehead, but Yuan Ming suddenly opened his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Woman, you must be careful during this period." Hellion Vivian nodded, the stray hair in front of her forehead covered. Indeed, she had to be careful because the other person in her body was restless. She only hoped that she could control it. However, some people just could not stand to see Hellion Vivian doing well. After this round of investigation, Su Yin Mo's public self-reflection had become a laughingstock in the circle. People in the circle could not help but pout when Su Yin Mo was mentioned. They looked down on this woman from the bottom of their hearts. She was vicious and pretentious. Now that the matter had escalated, wasn't it embarrassing for her husband's family? However, more people changed their views of Hellion Vivian. There was no lack of capable children in this circle, but this was the first time that the stepmother was punished and the daughter was in the limelight. Hellion Vivian had been mentioned many times, and occasionally, Hellion Jiaoer would be mentioned as well. Someone sneered, "In the past, I thought that Hellion Jiaoer wasn't bad. She was quite a kind child. I didn't expect that it was all an act. What's the most talented girl in the capital? She's just an embroidered pillow. She looks good, but she's useless. She's a far cry from Hellion Vivian. You guys don't know how popular that profound heavens of hers is. Even the retired emperor had to ask her to help him make weapons. You guys just wait and see. Sooner or later, this Hellion family will return to Hellion Vivian's hands." Sitting in the carriage, the more Hellion Guangyao listened to the conversation outside, the gloomier his expression became. Ever since the incident with Su Yin Mo, he felt awkward whenever he went out. Although he still had real power in his hands, it was still difficult to avoid those who were pointing at him. There were also a few powerful people in the family who more or less warned him to be careful. The clan meeting was about to begin. He could not drop the ball at this time. Hellion Guangyao took a deep breath and his eyes darkened. He did not believe that that unfilial daughter would continue to live so happily. If he remembered correctly, there were still a few more days until the officials recommended the third prince to choose a secondary consort. He wanted to see if Hellion Vivian would still be able to show off in front of him once the third prince had a new lover. Thinking of this, Hellion Guangyao curved his thin lips. He had something to say in today's morning court, early morning. In the Great Hall, the emperor sat on the dragon throne. Looking at his sleepy expression, it was obvious that he had either spent too much time refining pills last night or slept with some concubine again. Emperor Murong had always been resentful because the empress was banished to the cold palace. Although the retired emperor only said that it was a small punishment, Emperor Murong knew better than anyone that once one was in the cold palace, it would be difficult to get out. He had never resented the emperor's incompetence as much as he did now. The reason why the Murong family had such great power was all because of the emperor's incompetence. Now, this power was about to be destroyed by the emperor's incompetence. All of this was because the emperor had a very capable son. As long as Beligaju was around, his nephew could forget about inheriting the throne. Thinking of the fifth prince who went to the Murong family's residence crying for his mother yesterday, Emperor Murong's eyes flashed with a strong murderous intent. However, he hid this murderous intent well because he knew that he could not be too hasty in dealing with Beligaju. "Your Majesty." Helian Guangyao knelt on the ground, his voice resounding throughout the great hall. Just when all the officials thought that he was going to cry out for his wife's injustice, Helian Guangyao suddenly raised his voice and said, "It won't be long before the third prince's birthday. The third prince is the heir apparent appointed by the retired emperor. He should choose a talented and beautiful woman to assist him in his 20s. I know that it is not convenient for the other officials to mention this matter. After all, the third princess consort is my daughter. But I know my own daughter. How can a woman with no face be favored for a long time? Rather than provoke the third prince's disgust, it is better to let the third prince choose one he likes now." The emperor did not expect Helian Guangyao to suddenly mention the matter of selecting a secondary consort. The emperor had been rejecting his third son for so many years, especially when he heard the words crown prince. In fact, no matter how incompetent he was, he still wanted to hold on to his current position greedily. However, he was very afraid of the retired emperor. While the emperor was still hesitating, Emperor Murong also knelt on the ground. "Your Majesty, the crown prince must choose a talented and beautiful woman to assist him in his 20s. This has been the rule of our dynasty for generations. It is obvious that the third princess consort does not meet the requirements in terms of appearance. The third prince must choose someone else to be his secondary consort." The emperor looked at the two military officials who were kneeling in the great hall. Each of them represented the power of a family. Especially after these two people finished speaking, the others followed suit and knelt down. He had no choice but to raise his hand and said, "My dear officials, please rise. Ju heir has indeed reached the age, so let's take in a secondary consort." As he spoke, the emperor looked at the eunuch who was serving at the side. "Inform everyone that in the selection ceremony 3 days later, the talented and beautiful woman will be the third prince's secondary consort." "Yes, Your Majesty." The eunuch accepted the order and left. Helian Guangyao and Emperor Murong lowered their eyes with different thoughts in their minds. The corners of their mouths curled into a sinister smile. This time, with Yun Biluo's appearance and ability, she would definitely pull Helian Vivian down. No matter how capable Helian Vivian was, she would be defeated by her dark and ugly face sooner or later. Chapter 380. Have you all heard? What? The third prince is going to choose a secondary consort? Really? Of course it's true. The imperial list has been posted. I heard that the person who will be chosen this time must be both talented and beautiful. Miss Yun is the first to be chosen. Shoo, lower your voice. Helian Vivian is in front. Be careful not to be heard by her. The surrounding voices became louder and louder. Helian Vivian did not show any reaction. She only paused for a moment and then strolled into the courtyard where Tu Su Feng lived. Today, little Chi was not here, so the place was a bit deserted. Yuan Ming also followed Helian Vivian and listened all the way. He put his hands behind his head and looked sideways at Helian Vivian. That man was going to choose a secondary consort. He did not know what this woman was going to do next. If he had to say, there was no good man. While that man's heart was still on her, she would do him a few times to replenish her yang energy. Then, she would leave immediately. Yuan Ming told Helian Vivian about this idea. Helian Vivian only gave him 2 words with a smile. "Shut up." Then, she turned and entered the room. After Tu Su Feng saw her, he raised his eyes and put down the brush in his hand. His eyebrows seemed to carry some gentleness. "Sit. Dean, why did you call me here alone?" With Helian Vivian's understanding of Tu Su Feng, if nothing happened, he would not confuse the dean with his identity as a general in the battle spirit forces. unless something urgent happened. Hearing this, Tu Su Feng's eyes darkened. He looked out of the window deeply and said, "Recently, the White Academy's aura is very unstable. The last time you investigated, it involved White Academy. Someone wants to destroy the auspicious aura of White Academy. I am worried that it will happen here soon, so I have already sent little Chi back to the palace. But other people cannot know this news. Because in the entire Dragon War Empire, including the palace, White Academy is the place with the strongest auspicious aura. If even White Academy has a problem, the world is bound to be in chaos." "Dean, what do you want me to do?" Hellion Vivian also needed to quickly solve the problem of the aura here. This way, she would always have nightmares, which made her feel a little annoyed. Tu Su Feng raised his head, his eyes shining brightly. "You've tamed the Azure Dragon. There are very few people who can tame the Azure Dragon in this world. Do you know why the Azure Dragon is suppressed in the Azure Dragon Lake? Didn't someone lock it at the bottom of the lake because it committed a crime and got into trouble?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Su Feng smiled. "So many years have passed, the Azure Dragon's memories are also somewhat muddled, but the recorder will not make a mistake. The reason why the Azure Dragon hibernates in the Azure Dragon Lake is because it caused too many massacres in the past, and because this place needs its protection." Hellion Vivian frowned. "Protect? That's right." Tu Su Feng held the teacup, his eyes reflected in the water, deep and shallow. When it was spitting fire and massacring the city, it burned everything except this place. It could have escaped with its heavy body, but it was suppressed under the Azure Dragon Lake by the mysterious ice iron lock. It's not because it couldn't escape, but because this place is the place where its master is most likely to reawaken. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and guessed, "That underground palace was also built by the Azure Dragon's master? You're really smart." Tu Su Feng's smile deepened. At that time, the Divine Continent was not as peaceful as it is now. Demons ran rampant in the world, and everywhere was plunged into misery and suffering. Humans did not have any status at all, but it was during this special period that the one who led this group of demons was a human. A human? Hellion Vivian's interest was piqued, her eyebrows slightly raised. Tu Su Feng nodded. "You can't say that he's completely a human. Some people say that he's the child of a demon and a human, but who knows the specifics? What I want to say is that when this man led this group of demons, it was not too excessive, because not only did the demons admire him, but even the humans loved and hated him. But later, some people were not satisfied with being ruled, so they united the power of the Taoist masters and threw him into the 9 layers of chaos, so that he could never be reincarnated in this world. But what people didn't expect was that after this man was gone, the world would be even more chaotic. Since then, the demons had no leader, and they could eat humans whenever they wanted, and they could do evil whenever they wanted. The Taoist masters couldn't bear the suffering of the human world, so they removed their celestial bones and gathered 4 Dharma monks with profound magic power from the Taoist and Buddhist sections. With their flesh and blood as the guide, they set up 4 seals to subdue demons in the 4 directions of the Divine Continent, and sealed all the demons and ghosts under the Yellow Spring for several years. That man should not have appeared until now. Hellion Vivian's eyes were indifferent. Otherwise, the Azure Dragon would not continue to stay at the bottom of the Azure Dragon Lake and not go anywhere. It's waiting for its master. Tu Su Feng glanced at Hellion Vivian, as if he was praising her quick thinking. That's right. As long as that man does not come back, the Azure Dragon will definitely not leave. The auspicious chi on the Azure Dragon, for so many years, has endlessly affected the White Academy. As the guardian of the palace, it has always been protecting the White Academy. But now, there's a problem. At this point, he paused, then said, "Other than the effect of suppressing the Azure Dragon's body, the profound ice iron chain allows the Azure Dragon to remain unaffected by any aura even without a master. Once the profound ice iron chain breaks, the Azure Dragon will become a divine beast that is easily affected by the outside world. I shouldn't have undone the profound ice iron chain." Hellion Vivian's fingers clenched. She did not expect that it would bring about such consequences. Tu Su Feng shook his head and laughed. "This matter is not your fault. We came to this world. Everything has an opportunity. That year, when we were suppressing the Azure Dragon, there was a prophecy that the profound ice iron chain would be undone one day, and the Azure Dragon would fly out of the clouds one day. This is a sign that that man is about to wake up, so you don't have to blame yourself too much. Now, what you need to do is to go to the Azure Dragon Lake more often. The Azure Dragon is still willing to get close to you, and the Imperial Court is not very stable recently. I am afraid that it will affect the White Academy. You should be more careful when you are by Ju-Er's side. Those two nephews of mine, no matter the older one or the younger one, they always make people worry. Hearing Tu Su Feng mention Beligaju, Hellion Vivian absent-mindedly agreed. This time, Yuan Ming listened more seriously than Hellion Vivian. His gaze fell on her face. If you want to investigate the matter of resentment, I suggest that you bring along your family's man. Although until now, he still could not understand that third prince, but to be able to bring the fire Qilin by his side, he was definitely not as simple as he looked. Chapter 381. Hellion Vivian didn't think that the current Beligaju had the time to accompany her to investigate the resentment. The date of the secondary consort selection was imminent. Whether Beligaju wanted to select this secondary consort or not, he had to solve this matter. Hellion Vivian's head was a little swollen from thinking. In addition, the weather was hot. Her back was wet after a few steps, which made it difficult for her to calm down. The feeling of being roasted by the sun was not good. Staying in the house was stuffy and stuffy. Hellion Vivian had never thought that she would miss the air conditioner of the 21st century so much. To be honest, she was a little hesitant. If there was really a way to go back to the modern world, would she be able to go back after she was done with the matter here? Hellion Vivian didn't think about this from the beginning, because she was used to going with the flow. Wherever she went, the first thing she thought of was to adapt. But now that she had such a thought, she couldn't stop it. However, even if it was like this, Wei Wei still maintained her own unique rationality. She knew that the most important thing for her now was not to stop the resentment or whether to go back to the modern world. It was her physical condition. The night of the full moon was coming soon. She had to make all the preparations in advance, so she didn't hesitate. She directly used all the people who could be used and arranged to meet the second young master of the He family at the trading courtyard. When Hellion Vivian walked into the trading courtyard, it was time for dinner. After the people eating saw her, one after another, intentionally or unintentionally, their gazes shifted away as they quietly discussed. No wonder the emperor would let the third prince choose a new consort. This Hellion Wei Wei's face is really sigh. That's why Sister Yun is still the best. Someone continued, last time, everyone was punished. Only Sister Yun was fine. It can be seen who the third prince is hiding in his heart. Hellion Vivian listened to the voices below. She didn't know why her chest felt a little stuffy. It was probably that feeling in her body again. That was enough. Hellion Vivian laughed self-deprecatingly. She raised her head and drank a cup of cold water. Just as she was about to fan herself with her hand, she heard a deep and pleasant voice. Are you alone? Hellion Vivian raised her head and was met with a pair of gentle and smiling eyes. That pair of eyes seemed to be the purest in the world. They were long, narrow, beautiful, and as clear as water. The man smiled at Hellion Vivian, as if he could calm down the heat of the summer. Is it boring to listen to these people talk? A little. Hellion Vivian supported her chin with her fingers and curved her thin lips. But it's all right. What do you think, young Master Wushuang? Isn't it like watching a show? Jing Wushuang was stunned for a moment before she smiled and said, I thought my disguise was perfect, but you saw through it. These people are really interesting. Hellion Vivian lightly smiled and used the teacup in her hand to touch the other one on the table. I've always said that I don't have time to drink tea. Today, I'll treat young Master Wushuang. You can call me Wushuang. Jing Wushuang's gentle voice always made people feel comfortable. He looked at Hellion Vivian's wrist and coughed. Are you comfortable using the Myriad Manifestations umbrella? Hellion Vivian nodded. It's very comfortable. I made a few changes later on. Really? Jing Wushuang stretched out her hand. Let me see. Hellion Vivian didn't refuse. She moved her fingers, and a black umbrella appeared in her hand. Jing Wushuang took it and twisted the handle a few times. As expected of the golden boss of profound heavens. You can even think of such changes. I'm just playing with it for fun. Hellion Vivian didn't care. Her martial chi was different from other people's. It didn't matter to her whether or not she had martial arts. Jing Wushuang looked at Hellion Vivian and smiled. In this world, you're the only one who thinks of martial arts as a game. After he finished speaking, he lightly coughed twice. A thick medicinal scent wafted out of his long sleeve. That day, outside the city, I thought you didn't want to marry into the royal family. Hellion Vivian knew which day he was talking about. It was the day she used all kinds of methods to escape from His Highness. She propped up her chin and said lazily, "At that time, I didn't want to." "Then why did you want it?" Jing Wushuang's hand paused in the middle of drinking tea. When he looked at Hellion Vivian, his smile widened. Hellion Vivian wouldn't tell anyone about the deal between her and Beligaju. She just said, "I thought the third prince wasn't bad, so I married him." So that's how it is. Jing Wushuang didn't ask any more questions. He had always been like this, knowing when to stop when it was appropriate to do so. And he didn't make people feel awkward. It was probably because of the thick, medicinal scent on his body. It was like he could even calm down the years. Even if he didn't say anything, he still made people feel comfortable. Hellion Vivian yawned and felt a little sleepy. Jing Wushuang glanced at her. Tired? A little. Hellion Vivian simply laid her whole body on the wooden table. Jing Wushuang looked into her eyes. Have you not been resting well recently?
Yes.
Hellion Vivian counted. She had 3 nightmares last night. In addition, she had been consciously or unconsciously resisting the heat brought by the dual cultivation these days. It was inevitable that she couldn't sleep well. Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes. His long and thick eyelashes were beautiful. Is it because the third prince is going to choose a concubine? No. Hellion Vivian paused and smiled gently. It's not because of him. It's because of me. Maybe it's because the weather is too hot. Jing Wushuang sipped the tea in the teacup. His voice was gentle. If you feel sad, you can ask me to drink tea at any time. Don't force yourself. If you don't want him to marry a concubine, you can tell me. Thank you. But, Hellion Vivian thought for a while and took a more tactful tone. It's the third prince's business whether he wants to marry a concubine or not. I won't interfere. He was a prince, and it was very likely that he would become the emperor in the future. This time, she could interfere. What about next time? If she interfered in everything, it would be successful. Then she would definitely become a woman like the empress. She would use all means to fight for a man's favor. She didn't want to be like that, so she wouldn't interfere in this kind of thing. When Bailey Jiaju walked up the stairs, he heard this sentence. That pair of beautiful eyes suddenly darkened. Hellion Vivian also saw him. He was wearing a green robe and a white robe. With his 2 slender legs, his perfect inverted triangle figure had a cold indifference at this time. He took off his cloak and casually threw it to the side. After doing all this, he turned his head and stared into Hellion Wei's eyes. His pair of eyes were clear and deep like the sea, suffused with a faint black color, as if he could drown a person. However, after realizing this, Hellion Vivian's fingers trembled and she subconsciously grabbed his hand. But obviously, she didn't have the strength to do it, so she could only let him ignite her back. Beligaju looked at her crimson face and knew that her body, which was on the verge of dual cultivation, couldn't withstand his provocation. He deliberately slowed down, and his fingers caressed her waist and back. His knees bent slightly, and he squeezed between her legs, making her unable to resist at all. Want me to let you go? Then open your mouth. Hellion Vivian bit her thin lips. She didn't know how the other party seemed to have grasped all of her weaknesses, but she knew that if Beligaju continued like this, she might do something stupid like hugging him and rubbing against him. What dual cultivation? It was definitely to destroy her willpower. Beligaju coldly looked at Hellion Vivian, picked her up and put her in the corner, and raised his eyebrows to signal her to move faster. Hellion Vivian didn't want to provoke him at this time. Just as she opened her mouth, he kissed her lips. As if deliberately unwilling to let her go, Beligaju slid his tongue in and slowly pointed at her. "Don't use your teeth." Hellion Vivian paused. He sucked the tip of her tongue, and her legs went soft in an instant. "Look up at me." Beligaju seemed to want to teach her to the end. "Suck it, give me your tongue, and breathe with your nose." It was the first time Hellion Vivian had been kissed like this. As soon as she stuck out her tongue, she could see his handsome face more sinister than ever, as if he wanted to tear her apart and eat her. He didn't allow her to lower her head or close her eyes. As she listened to the kiss, her eyes were confused, and her face was slightly red. In the end, her whole body went soft. He lowered his head on her forehead, and the punishment was over. However, his hands were still in her robe, sliding from her back to her spine. "In the future, if you say something wrong, I will use this method to teach you how to speak." Bailey Jiaju's kiss landed on the tip of Hellion Wei Wei's reddened ear. Finally, the cold air from before had lessened by quite a bit. Hellion Vivian couldn't control it as well as he could. She was still panting, and she felt as if her whole body was about to be burned. Her tongue was still numb, and she was too lazy to speak. Beligaju also knew that he had bullied Hellion Vivian this time. His left hand comforted her by patting Hellion Vivian's back. "Be honest in the future. Put away those thoughts of yours, understand?" She wasn't honest enough. She was pressed in the corner and forced to kiss on the spot, but she didn't resist. She was honest enough. Thoughts? Could it be that Beligaju knew that she had asked Hei's to prepare for her? It shouldn't be. She didn't show anything. Moreover, the person who was going to choose a secondary consort was him, not her. Hellion Vivian's legs were still weak. She looked at Beligaju, silently expressing her thoughts. Beligaju looked at her unconvinced little face, and the more he wanted to bully her, the more his fingers used force. He lowered his head and bit her ear. He really wanted to see what this pair of eyes would look like when they were forced to cry by extreme pleasure. Chapter 383. Hellion Weiwei didn't understand why he was suddenly so energetic. Just as she was about to open her mouth, her breath was blocked by a burst of slightly cool softness, carrying a unique iciness that suppressed all the words she wanted to say. She didn't even have time to react before that residual scent of tea pride opened her lips with a temperature that could almost burn people. Beligaju grabbed Hellion Vivian's slender waist and pressed her against his chest. Like a hurricane, he swept up the sweet taste that should have belonged to him. It seemed that only by doing this could he suppress the violence that wanted to lock her up. Once again, the slightly forceful kiss made Hellion Vivian's mind blank. It was as if she had a lack of blood and completely lost the ability to think. When she reacted, it was sweet and soft. There was a strange excitement in response to the sound of footsteps not far away. A numbness like an electric current ran from her spine to her brain. Hellion Vivian had long lost her strength. If Beligaju hadn't pressed her face into his chest, she would have definitely become the target of a crowd. Beligaju lowered his eyes to look at Hellion Vivian in his arms. The corners of his mouth moved wickedly. He wanted to see how long her body could endure. Resist. The more you resist, the more excited he will feel. After such a long time, she still didn't understand that she had no chance to escape from him. After entangling, their breaths were a little messy. Hellion Vivian felt that her whole body was burning hot and hungry. She couldn't think at all, and could only follow the rhythm of the other party. If it weren't for the string of rationality in her mind, the consequences would have been terrible. This made Hellion Vivian very depressed. "Can't you punish me in another way? It was very dangerous to kiss like this, okay?" Bailey Jiaju softly replied with a He used his finger to rub against Hellion Wei's thin lips that were red from kissing. With a smile that was not a smile, he bit her again. "You can push me away. Or is it that you simply can't push me away because you enjoy it too much?" After Bailey Jiaju finished speaking, he retracted his hand. He leisurely tidied up his clothes and paced out of the long alley. That appearance was like a kind hunter sparing the life of his prey. The fire Cheelin was faintly discernible as it followed behind Beligaju. It did not understand why its master was so kind. Thus, the fire Cheelin asked in bewilderment, "Master, you're letting her go just like that? How was this punishment?" According to the master's character, he should have swallowed the prey into his stomach in one gulp. Thinking about how generous he was now, it really didn't seem like something a sinister and cunning master would do. Beligaju laughed lowly, with a demonic charm that made people's scalp numb. "Pray, you have to wait for her to be at her weakest. Only when you bite her will the taste be the best." At first, the fire Cheelin did not understand Beligaju's meaning, until he smiled evilly and said, "The night of the full moon is coming soon." The fire Cheelin suddenly understood. TSK. So Master had this kind of plan. The night of the full moon was the time when the demonic cultivator's aura was the most chaotic, especially with Miss Hullion's current state. When that day comes, she will definitely need to be comforted. She will probably have a reaction tonight. Master is really, cough. It's better to silently light a candle for Miss Hellion, who doesn't know anything. After being taught by the royal family on the spot, Hellion Vivian's mind kept replaying what happened in the alley. Different from before, the kiss this time was especially clear. Beligaju was right. She did not feel disgusted. In fact, she enjoyed it. When the kiss reached the end, she actually wanted him to continue. Although she inevitably felt ashamed, in fact, no matter how she rinsed her mouth, she would remember what he said. "Suck it. Give me your tongue. Breathe through your nose, damn it." Hellion Vivian took a deep breath. Who would have thought that she would one day fall to such a state? Other than dual cultivation, there seemed to be something else. If it was someone else, she would definitely feel disgusted. But the other party was Beligaju. It was as if everything was a matter of course. Hellion Vivian's body froze. She did not return to the trading courtyard. Instead, she walked back to her own room and soaked her whole body in the cold water that was prepared in the room. Originally, her body had been very successful in resisting the heat recently. Today, after being disturbed by Beligaju, she felt that something was wrong. She could only use the cold water to lower her body temperature. Compared to Beligaju, it was obvious that Hellion Vivian did not know much about devil cultivators. Just like what Yuan Ming said, the effects of dual cultivation were far greater than the effects of drugs. Other than feeling weak, she would also have many muddled dreams. Hellion Vivian did not know how she fell asleep. She vaguely felt Beligaju pressing on her body, kissing her neck one after another. In her dream, he was still holding her up. His ascetic handsome face carried a devilish smile. Then, he reached his hand into her underwear, touching here and there. His touch made her entire body numb. She also dreamt that Beligaju was pressing on her legs while kissing her lips. He stole her breath while licking her tongue and upper jaw. He did not forget to teach her how to kiss. Hellion Vivian felt that her entire body was about to be played to pieces. However, she could not escape. It was as if she was entangled by invisible threads. Her heart did not want to sink, but her body could not free itself. When she woke up, Hellion Vivian was dumbfounded. What was with this kind of dream? She would rather have nightmares. Fortunately, the heat on her body had cooled down. Hellion Vivian comforted herself. She casually took a towel and wiped herself. In the mirror, her thin lips were still a little red. It seemed that she still had to find Heizei first and prepare the things. She did not want to lose to this kind of reaction. Dusk, the slightly tipsy sunset gradually sank to the bottom of the lake. A man dressed in white stood by the lakeside. His ink-black hair fluttered in the wind and was casually tied up with a black string. He was tall and slender, and his eyes were filled with a thick mist. "Master, she already does not remember you." Standing behind the man was a small person, carrying a gourd on his back. The man nodded and did not say anything else. The small person blinked and looked at the green dragon swimming at the bottom of the lake with the man. "Master, do you really want to destroy the auspicious aura here? If you do, won't many people die?"
Yes.
The man smiled. "Isn't it good to have dead people?" The small person counted with his fingers. "It's not bad. Recently, The little baldy that you asked me to get close to is quite fun. Then, do you want to have fun, or watch the 100 Ghosts parade? The man waved his finger. The surface of the lake seemed to have sensed something and rippled. His long eyebrows furrowed. The action of lifting his leg to leave also followed by withdrawing. He turned his face sideways and saw Helian Wei Wei first. Before that pair of eyes could warm up, he saw Heizei standing by her side. That pair of inky eyes that made young girls willingly fly like moths to a flame thoroughly sank. At this moment, Yun Biluo had already walked up to Helian Vivian. She wore a gentle smile on her face. "Why are you here?" Helian Vivian looked at her and smiled, but her eyes were cold. She had clearly told her not to pretend to be familiar with her. Yun Biluo seemed to have forgotten about it. She continued to talk to herself. When she glanced at Hei's, the smile on her face became softer. "I saw Wei Wei coming down from Master Hei's carriage last time. Today I see Master Hei's again. What a coincidence." Helian Vivian did not speak. She only looked at Yun Biluo's smiling face. When Yun Biluo could no longer maintain her fake smile, she raised her lips and said in a cold voice, "Miss Yun, there are some things that need to be stopped before it is too late." As soon as she finished speaking, she did not say another word. She strode past Yun Biluo and Bailey Jiaju. It was Yun Biluo's business that she liked to act. She did not want to play along with that weak lady. His Highness would be happy to play along with the maidservant that he was protecting, whether intentionally or not. She did not want to. She did not even want Yun Biluo to know anything about Hei's. She could roughly guess Yun Biluo's means. She could not get anything from her. Perhaps she would do something to the people around her in a fit of madness. Yun Biluo looked at Helian Vivian's back view, which did not give her any face at all. The corners of her mouth curled up a little. The moment Beligaju missed Helian Vivian's arm, his whole body turned cold. The remaining smile on his face disappeared in a flash, as if it had never existed. His chest suddenly felt as if it was blocked by cotton. His heart became more upset for no reason. His sleeves fluttered, bringing out a strong sense of hostility. Hei's, who felt everything, looked up and met Beligaju's gaze. He sneered in his heart. How did this woman find such a ruthless character for herself? She might be forced into a corner in the future. Were the plans she made in advance useful? Probably because Heizei paused for too long. Wei Wei directly dragged him upstairs, her expression as tranquil as water. Bailey Jiaju, who was about to step forward, stood there coldly. His deep eyes were so deep that the bottom could not be seen. He frowned slightly. His 10 beautiful ivory fingers were hidden under his long sleeves. Perhaps it was because the temperature was too low, or because he had been out for too long, even his fingertips were a little cold. It seemed to always be like this when facing Hei's. She was more defenseless than ever. Even that pair of cold eyes would emit a gentle light. He understood her. If it was not someone she absolutely trusted, she would not allow anyone to get close to her. Even the name she had called out when she was drunk was related to Heizei. When facing him, she would only hide her secrets deeper. Even if she really wanted something, she would not ask him for help. She just had to ask an outsider. Chapter 385. Yun Biluo, who was standing at the side, looked at the direction he was looking at. Her pair of clear eyes darkened. Beligaju did not speak. His jade-carved skin glowed faintly. That pair of cold eyes slowly drooped down. His long and thick eyelashes, like a crow's wing, cast a dark shadow on the ground. Even Yun Biluo could not figure out what he was thinking just by looking at his expression. This made Yun Biluo more or less helpless. He had been like this since he was young. She could not figure him out. However, no matter how interested he was in Helian Vivian, she was afraid that he would not be interested in her now because he hated dirty prey the most. Yun Biluo's eyes lit up as she recalled what she heard before. She used to feel that there was something strange between Helian Vivian and His Highness. Now, she finally knew why it was strange. That was the reason why they got married. It seemed that this was worth investigating. Beligaju was not interested in knowing what Yunbiluo was thinking. What he needed most now was silence. He was afraid that he would not be able to control the beast in his heart and accidentally tear Hellion Vivian into pieces. Master, as Fire Qilin, it was impossible for it not to notice the change in Beligaju's martial chi. Looking at the pair of eyes that were beginning to be invaded by the demonic nature, Fire Qilin immediately showed itself. Bailey Jiaju quickly walked out of the tea house. He swung his fist and ruthlessly smashed it against the stone wall. After a loud bang, he shook his hand and took a deep breath. The dull pain transmitted from the surface of his fist made him slightly calm down. Bailey Jiaju coldly smiled and ground out a few words from between his thin lips. Sure enough, no matter how I raise you, you can't mature. The wind that came in messed up Bailey Jiaju's hair. He looked at his bleeding fingers. The coldness in his eyes was like a pine and cypress that melted into his ink-like eyes. Hellion Vivian did not know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the room suddenly darkened. The sun seemed to be covered by clouds, and the light became thin. Are you thinking about the third prince? A familiar voice rang in her ears. Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked over, only to see the black-haired, white-clothed he-eyes drinking tea with a faint smile on his lips. His eyes were dark and pure, without a trace of impurity. His other hand used the teacup to touch her face. No, Hellion Vivian didn't even think about it. She said almost instinctively, "My relationship with him is not what you think." At this moment, even He-Eye's eyes were filled with amusement. Then what is it? Could it be that the relationship between the two of you isn't real? Otherwise, why would this girl ask him to prepare so many things to escape from the capital? It was obvious that she didn't plan to stay in the palace forever. We even entered the bridal chamber. How could it not be real? Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea. She looked indifferent, trying to skip the topic. However, He-Eyes was very smart. Don't deny it. You asked me to prepare so many things. Which one of them isn't for leaving the capital? But this is good too. I've told you before that the third prince will choose a secondary consort sooner or later. You've met Yunbiluo, so it's very likely that she will take advantage of this opportunity to enter the palace. I used to wonder why you were willing to be the third prince's chess piece with your character. Now it seems that you two have reached some kind of agreement? He didn't use me as a chess piece. Hellion Vivian put down the teacup in her hand. We are helping each other. I help him to stop the retired emperor from urging him to marry. He is my backer, so that I can have more ability to take back the Hellion family in the clan meeting. I asked you to prepare those things for me to leave a way out for myself. He-Eyes glanced at Hellion Vivian with a meaningful look in his eyes. I don't think the third prince will like you to leave such a way out. He probably won't want you to leave the palace. Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and fiddled with the teacup with her fingers. I'm not suitable for the palace. There are too many women fighting for favor in the palace. I'm suitable for finding someone to live with. There's nothing else. He-Eyes looked at her absent-minded appearance and thought of what had just happened downstairs. He reached out his hand to touch her head and smiled domineeringly. Wait until we leave the capital, then slowly look for it. Anyway, you have money on you, so you can raise whatever you want. Hellion Wei's mood improved when she heard about her assets. She curled her thin lips and said, It's true that I want to leave the capital. But I heard that you've been having a good time recently. Is that true? What things? He-Eyes turned the teacup in his hand lazily. Hellion Vivian said something shocking. It's about you being indecent. He-Eyes choked on the wine that he didn't drink. Hellion Vivian smiled happily. She held the teacup and drank a few mouthfuls. She looked no different from a shrewd little fox. Some people were like this. They didn't interact with each other, but once they did, there would be a lot to talk about. He-Eyes glared at Hellion Wei. What nonsense are you spouting? It's been spread outside. It's said that young Master He has been too well-behaved these days. He didn't even touch women. I guess he likes men. Wei's face carried a smile that could almost see through Hei's. Did something happen between you and that little childhood sweetheart of yours? He-Eyes coughed again. You're just a child. Don't ask about adult matters. Tell me, why are you looking for me this time? Hellion Vivian was about to open her mouth when her ears suddenly moved. She looked in the direction of the corner of the second floor. The person standing there was none other than Yun Biluo. She looked at Hellion Vivian with her bright eyes. "Miss Vivian, I want to sit down and talk with you." Hellion Vivian crossed her arms and smiled gently. "I'm sorry, I don't want to talk to you at all. You can leave now." She wasn't sure if Yun Biluo heard it, but at this time, it didn't matter if she heard it. If Beligaju really wanted to choose Yun Biluo, he would tell her about the agreement between them. She originally thought that Beligaju mistook the affection as a hunt. She even wondered if he liked her a little. Now that she thought about it, perhaps there was something wrong with her thinking and she was thinking too much. After all, there was Yun Biluo, the servant who had accompanied him for so many years. Hellion Vivian wasn't good at handling feelings, but she didn't like women who pretended too much. Yun Biluo took a deep breath, her eyes reddened. "I know my appearance made you feel threatened. After all, you're the princess. But if it wasn't for what happened back then, His Highness and I would have." Yun Biluo paused as if she was holding back her tears. "The selection ceremony is in 2 days. I hope you can give me a chance to stay by his side." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.